Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to the rest of you guys. We are back for another episode of Bitcoin Magazine Live. I am your host, Q, coming to you yet again from my mother's basement. I am joined by my co-host, Chris, and we are joined by special guest today, Calvin Robinson. Calvin, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. How are you doing?
My absolute pleasure, Q. Thank you for the invitation. Is that why you've blurred out the background? Because you're in your mother's basement? Is that what it is?
Candidly, I have been living with my parents for some time now. This is my room, and technically speaking, it is downstairs. So the running joke has been I am in my mom's basement.
You're one of those trolls on the internet.
No, I spend a good majority of my time on the road, so it's nice to not have to pay rent to store all of my stuff when I'm not on the road. But I'll start by asking you this, Calvin. What you are based out of London, and you have made some comments over the course of the last few years of what you have noticed and seen. I'd love to maybe have you talk a little bit about some of the things that you've seen happen both in your country as well as just globally that you're noticing and paying close attention to.
Oh gosh, where to start? I think the biggest thing for me has been the shift away from democracy. So we like to proclaim that we are a democratic nation and we're part of the democratic West. One of the reasons we are supporting Ukraine at the moment is because it's apparently a democratic country. But I don't think any of those things are true at the moment. I think we've stepped away from democracy roughly around 2015, 2016. So I think it was the start of Brexit in the UK. I think it was the start of Trump's presidency in the US, where we've lost faith in the democratic process. And it is a system that takes trust. It's not something that structurally works without having a winning side and losers' consent. And we saw that the Remain camp would not concede a loss over here and wanted to keep having referenda until they won. And we saw in America that the Democrats could not face defeat. They would not see Donald Trump as their president. And likewise, when he lost in the second election, he would not concede defeat either. And without a losing side, there is no winner, so there is no democracy. And the same, we see this in Ukraine. There was pretty much a coup d'etat a few years ago, and the West forced their candidate in. I'm not saying this is why there's a war going on. I'm not saying I'm in favor of war, and I'm not saying in favor of Putin or Russia, but I'm saying there are more things at play here, and democracy is not as straightforward as it used to be.
No, absolutely. I had to quickly check our YouTube stream to make sure they did not deplatform us yet again for using some choice words there. But you're absolutely right. I think we've seen a slow demise for some time. I'm curious what your thoughts are on, like, we come from an American perspective, so forgive me for some of that. We see in America a lot of influx of dollars being spent to essentially buy your votes from large corporations, and there are laws that are in place to allow that. I'm curious how you see that play out in UK elections. Do you feel like corporatism is taking over a little bit of your politics as well?
Not in our elections. So our election system is very, very different to the United States. We have caps on how much you can spend, and it's negligible in comparison to what happens over there. There's very, very little money in politics in the UK in that sense, but we do have massive amounts of lobbying going on. But what's the problem over here is that we've seen a lot of spending, an incredible amount of spending. Over the course of this so-called pandemic, we've seen more spending than we've seen probably, decades and decades leading up to it, under any socialist government or anything like that. And what we're seeing as well is a lot of excuses coming out at the moment. We're seeing Russia being blamed for inflation, even though, of course, we're going to see inflation if the government's just spent billions of dollars and borrowed billions of dollars, is printing money left, right, and center, trying to spend its way out of a pandemic. We're seeing tax rises, we're seeing energy prices increase, fuel costs increase, and a lot of this is being shoved on to the war, that even though it began way before the war between Russia and Ukraine. And we're seeing a lot of distraction. Again, the war is being used as distraction against all of this too. We've got a so-called conservative government that should be economically conservative, that is promoting the idea of tax increases in order to help so-called save the economy. as we know, that will actually make things worse. So the money over here is an absolute mess. I don't even know how we're ever going to recover from the mess that we're in.
Yeah, I mean, in America, it's no different. We've seen about 80% of the dollars that are in circulation right now get printed over the last 2 years. We see the money printers just continue to go, regardless of what country you're in. England, the US, we talk about it in this show a lot, how Turkey is dealing with 52% inflation year over year. It is a consistent theme, unfortunately. I want to give you the opportunity, Calvin. What if you had the position to just make a sweeping declaration and change everything right now, starting today? What would be your first course of action in regards to the financial policies there?
In regards to financial policies, first of all, I cut taxes. I get rid of value added tax, or VAT, that we have on purchases over here. I'd cut national insurance. That's the tax that they're suggesting we should increase. That's, you know, the contributions taken from your wages. I'd enable people to keep more of the money they earn. That's the first thing I'd do. Secondly, I would separate the state from the banking system. So we have a Bank of England at the moment, and the Bank of England is promoting the idea of a centralized digital currency that it has control over. I think that's the most dangerous idea that we've ever heard, because of course that will lead to a social credit system that will lead to you being able to only spend your money in the right ways on the right things at the right times. And, you know, depending on who's in power, that could be very dangerous. So I'd like to see a separation of church and state, of finance and state, and potentially taking on board. So what we're seeing in other countries is the idea of things like Bitcoin and decentralized currency systems being approved of, if not made legal tender.
Well, that feeds right into what I wanted to, I guess, ask you next. Based on your conversation of, or based on your statements of, let's separate the financial markets, the banks, from our state, feels like Bitcoin it does exactly that. What are your sort of initial thoughts? I know at one point you'd spoken with Saifedean as well about the Bitcoin standard. Would love to gather your thoughts on what your observations are or have been about Bitcoin right now.
Yeah, it seems to me there are lots of people who say Bitcoin is the answer to this, Bitcoin is the answer to that. I think maybe Bitcoin might be the first iteration of the answer to a lot of these problems. It seems there are a lot of limitations, as in capacity, time, resources. All of these things are issues that we'd have to work around. But it seems to be a good example case, a case study of how this kind of decentralized digital currency could work in the mainstream.
Do you feel as though there are regulations in place or talks of regulations that could inhibit us exploring what Bitcoin could do? I know in America, there are conversations around that on both sides of the aisle.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think we're going to see more and more limitations and restrictions put in place over the next few years as governments discover that this could potentially lose them control over the financial system. So we need to move quickly and make sure that this spreads as rapidly as it possibly can. And to do that, we need consumers and retailers to get on board. Right now, it seems to me, as someone who's on the periphery of this, that it's very much a niche movement. That, you know, there are lots of people involved, but it's very much an in-group, and it needs to be something that is wider than that. It needs to be. I need to be able to nip to my local corner shop and use Bitcoin without having to have someone explain to me how it works, what apps I need to install, which wallet I need, and talking to me about the time it takes for transactions to take place. All of that needs to be cut down so that the average Joe can have a Bitcoin wallet and the average shop can receive payments in Bitcoin.
I mean, one of the things that I've been very loudly talking about is like the government regulations that go into place of taking one app or business from one country to the next territory are so difficult. I don't believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, something like Cash App, which is one of the most used applications to access Bitcoin. It has helped many who are unbanked here in America get banking access, allow them to get direct deposits. You're able to buy fractions of stocks, a whole other conversation there, but that essentially allows them to just very quickly have and hold their Bitcoin right there on your phone and transact it quickly. I always also love to highlight, I know you mentioned the idea of like, oh, how fast these transactions go or how much they cost. It is important to note and highlight the fact that a Bitcoin transaction is fully confirmed and validated in 10 minutes time. Whereas if you or I were to use our credit cards right now, the merchant's not going to see that money for the next 24, possibly even 72 hours. So while the merchant may not see the benefit of it today, slowly but surely they will, on top of the credit card fees, whatever the Visa or MasterCard or American Express wants to take, both out of the merchant's pocket or sometimes get it passed along to us. It goes back to the idea of let's not tax people. Let's not tell people how or when they can spend their money. It feels as though Bitcoin does, and I hate to say it like this, it does solve a lot of these problems that you're discussing. It allows us to transact freely whenever we want on whatever we see fit, so long as we have access to the internet and we actually hold Bitcoin. The knowledge of it, though, I'm a little curious because you talk to an ordinary person, and by ordinary person, I just mean the sheeple or the people, the masses. They don't know how money works. They don't understand fractional reserve currency or fractional reserve banking. They just buy into the system that they've been told, hey, this is just how you do it. Could Bitcoin not just be sort of forced onto the masses in a similar way, the way the US dollar was forced onto the world?
No, because we learn about the fiat system through osmosis. So we learn about it not explicitly. So no one sits us down and says, this is legal tender, but all this note means is that someone owes you the value of this money, and then when money in your bank account doesn't actually exist, and it's all loaned by this, and no one sits down and explains that. But what you see is that actually people give you this note. That means that you can receive an item, and then you can put that note into your bank. It appears on your statement, and you learn these three things as you grow up through experience. So for Bitcoin to take place through osmosis, that would be a long, slow process, and many people would have to take it up first. There has to be a better way of educating people on how money works and how it could work. I don't know what that is, but I'm just suggesting there needs to be a better way.
This is what we try to do, is help people to really, I think, start to ask the question of what is money. That's how it really started for me. I came from the finance world. I was investing in stocks, and a friend of mine essentially brought Bitcoin up to me. And as I did my due diligence, I bought into just the idea of it as an investment vehicle, but it genuinely was me answering the question to myself of what is money. I don't know if it's fair for us to expect or even ask of everyone to go and ask that question of themselves, because most people just don't. The majority of people don't do that. So I want to figure out a way to cater to them, because ultimately it doesn't work if not everyone is using it. I can't go to the grocery store and say, oh, well, this is the grocery store that accepts Bitcoin, and this is the grocery store that accepts dollars, and that's the one that accepts Visa, and that's the one that accepts MasterCard. It becomes a little too siloed off. I personally don't think that helps us, but I'm curious if you maybe disagree that there is a way for everyone to start answering and thinking about these questions.
I don't know about us answering the questions, because I would say money is an idea, money is a promise. It's not an actual tangible thing. But I think that's a depth that most people don't need to go into. All we need is convenience. So one difference between America and Great Britain, for example, is that I can go anywhere in this country without my wallet now and just use my smartphone. Whether I can get a taxi to the train station, I can get a train ticket, I can go in the shop, in the station on the way there. Pretty much every part of my day, I can just use my mobile phone and use contactless everywhere. And I understand that, it might have changed since the last time I was in the US, because I haven't been there since COVID. But the last time I was in the US, it was much more difficult to go out of the house without your wallet, because some places would have contactless, some places wouldn't. Some places you'd have to swipe and sign. Some places would only take Apple Pay. Some places would take different things, and it was just so broken up, and just it didn't feel convenient. For a new method of payment to take over, it has to be convenient. So there has to be a way to make it so simple for, as you call them, the merchants, the retailers, to take this on board, and so simple for consumers to install the app and just get going with it, that it just becomes a non-issue. And whether that means building it into Android and iOS, so that there's a wallet straight there, part of the Apple Pay wallet or the Google wallet might be a way forward. But even then you've got problems. I use Coinbase, or I did until recently, and even that I'm thinking, do I actually want to continue using these guys after they've been so political recently? That's another problem. Who controls the wallets?
I mean, that is a very excellent point that you bring up. It is the idea of UX, I can confirm, unfortunately, no. It genuinely depends on where you go. Some grocery stores will accept Apple Pay. Some you have to have the credit card and insert the chip. They won't even let you tap the chip. But I think you also have in the UK, and correct me if I'm wrong, like it's not necessarily a cash industry anymore. There's cash is not typically transacted on a day-to-day basis. Is that an accurate assessment?
Yeah, and that worries the hell out of me because we've pretty much
Why?
become a digital world, a digital country. It was quite bad even before COVID, but over COVID, they really pushed us to go entirely digital. Like they removed the caps on Apple Pay and contactless payments. You know, there used to be a limit of like £30 or £50. They increased it. Now you can pretty much spend whatever you like I said, with just your mobile phone. You don't need cash. And actually, I found that some places are reluctant to take cash now because they think it carries germs, and therefore we don't have any tangible money anymore. We don't have money that we can hold in our hands and keep somewhere safe. It is all in the control of the banks, which are all in control of the government, and that is terrifying.
I mean, that again is just yet another perfect example of what Bitcoin helps and solves. It is that uncensorable, it is unchecked until you get it onto some sort of an exchange. Unless, and like, for example, I have a small business, very small business. I own a couple of vending machines and I accept cash, I accept credit cards, but I also accept Bitcoin. And that's my choice as a merchant to accept all of these forms of payment. I still have to mark it on my taxes as income as such and pay taxes on it accordingly. But that's up to me to do it. And I think right now there is still that opportunity for anyone to just be able to, hey, if you want to pay me in cash and pounds, if you want to pay me with credit card, fine. Or if I'll take Bitcoin, I will deal with that on my own. But I think as some of these earlier adopters, people who see the longevity benefit of separating our monetary system from the state itself, despite there being that intermediary of the banks, is vastly beneficial. You do touch on, though, the fact that Coinbase is essentially no different than a bank at this point. They are operating for the state. They have done exactly what the US government has said, and they shut down accounts in Russia. They don't know if those are Russian nationalists or if those are actually people who are pro-Ukraine, or even what if those are just VPNs from the US, the UK, some other country that are actually just routing their transactions through Russia.
It's outrageous that they've seized money in that way. I find it's tyranny. There's no other way to describe it.
I mean, your comments as well in regards to the truckers up in Canada. I love your thoughts and takes on that. We have been covering that ad nauseum over here at Bitcoin Magazine. We were turned away at the border trying to go up because I was not vaccinated enough in the eyes of the Canadian government, which was, don't even get me started on that sort of tangent, but would love your thoughts on just what you are seeing as far as state controlling who can access money. I think it's profound that you told us that you could at one point only spend 30 to 50 pounds on Apple Pay, to be limited by what, just because it's a digital transaction. I'm still trying to wrap my mind around that right now without having a fit.
Well, that was a safety net. That was the idea that if someone steals your card or your phone, they can only spend so much before having to prove that it's you. And I can understand that because I mean, with an Apple Pay, you can make sure you have face censorship, face scan, but with a card, the contactless card, unless you put a chip and pin in, there's no way to verify that it's you. So I understand wanting a safety net there, but removing it encourages people to go digital. And I'm all for people going digital if it's digitally free, but this is digitally limited and restricted by the government. I noticed someone's put in your comments, Bitcoin's uncensorable. Any store or person who wants to accept it can. And I get that. I totally get that in relation to what we were just talking about. But I could open a store and accept US dollars if I wanted to tomorrow. I'm not going to, because no one's going to come in my store and pay with US dollars. It's not just about the convenience of the merchant, it's also about the convenience of the consumer. And they've got to have a reason. There's got to be an incentive for the store to accept it.
What is that breaking point? And each individual is different based on what they value and hold close to them. For me right now, I'm deathly afraid of the fact that I wake up tomorrow and my currency and the value of what I can buy just decreased by 0.1%. Overnight, as that adds up, we're here in America being told it's 7.8%, closer to 15 to 20% in my mind, and based on my calculations, what I'm seeing. I think actually last night it was 13.8 is what I actually calculated. But that goes to show you and tell you that, like, the state is just going to tell you what they want. It's on us to a degree. this idea that they have our best interests in mind, the idea that they know what's best, or they're going to do what's best for us. They're going to create the system for Bitcoin to like help it come forward so that everyone can understand it. I don't think that's a realistic ask for the network itself or for people. I'm a little, I'm curious to know if you think to a degree the state has to intervene to help us get there. If you think that it does have to be something like Bitcoin being legal tender, i.e. the state getting involved, legalizing it, pushing it forward to then get us over that last hump, or if it's something else like I hate to be so extreme about this thought, but like, does it really take people not being able to access their money to what we're seeing in Russia and Ukraine and Canada, in the UK, for them to finally wake up and say like, okay, whoa, we can't have this?
Yeah, I don't think we have to rely on the state. I think we have to avoid the state as much as possible in every aspect of our lives. The only reason I mentioned making it legal tender is because we're talking about what I would do if I was in power, and I would free people up from the state. But the state doesn't ever free people up from it. People who are in power always want more power. That's the issue. So I think it has to be a revolution. And revolutions come around for many reasons, and one that you just mentioned is oppression. You know, if a government seizes your funds and locks people out, then you have to find alternative means. And like we saw in Canada, you know, they stopped people donating and froze people's accounts for donating as much as what, $20, and people had to find another way, and they resorted to Bitcoin. That's fantastic. But I'd like to think that we can get to that point before that, before people being oppressed. I don't know what that takes. I don't know how we get there. I don't know how you spark a big movement like that unless you really promote the pros and the freedom, the liberation that comes along with something like Bitcoin.
I feel like Alex is itching to ask, but I'm going to keep this train rolling for a moment, if I may. You're no longer using Coinbase. Are you using something else right now, that maybe something like Kraken, that very, very loudly and proudly said like, no, we're not going to shut down these wallets? Or is that just something that you're not paying attention to at this time?
I'm not paying that much attention to it. I don't have the capacity to keep on top of all this stuff, and that's another issue. We're all busy, we're all doing our own things, and unless it's a hobby of yours, but a hobby isn't, I mean, money isn't a hobby for everyone. So unless you're on top of it, it's difficult to keep track. So I'll have a look into Kraken. But even then, when there are organizations that say, look, we'll never do this, and we're the good guys, it's like, how do you actually trust them? How do you know that they aren't going to give your IP away? How do you know that they're going to seize your accounts? How do you trust some organization that is controlling your money, essentially? These exchanges and these wallets, they have a lot of power.
I don't disagree. I mean, we talked, I believe yesterday, about this, how the network itself was designed to be decentralized the moment Satoshi Nakamoto pushed the final update, essentially giving the nodes the right to make changes to Bitcoin and ceding his backdoor access. That helped and allowed it to be fully decentralized. However, once we introduce all these different wallets and all these different exchanges, you now create points of failure. You now have these pressure points where a government like the US can go to an exchange like Coinbase and say, hey, you have to shut this down. You have to shut this down in this region because we don't get along with them, or we don't like what they're doing. Or you could have Justin Trudeau say, hey, anyone who donated money to this wallet, we need to know their information because they're now terrorists. But it is, to a degree, the idea of decentralization still lives there. However, there is this back and forth because we still need the state to buy into Bitcoin and adopting it, while at the same time, our entire notion and idea is we want to separate money from state. So we have this sort of, we're walking a very fine line there, because we still have to appease the state. We still have to do what they do. I believe the CEO of Kraken said the statement of, to the Canadian truckers, get your coins off the exchanges and put them in your own wallets, because then I can't do anything. Once it's off my exchange, I can't touch it. That's your money, and I can't be held responsible or be told to lock your account or not, even if you are using it for illegal activities. I want to give you the opportunity, though, to ask or to answer, what is the majority of your time being taken up with right now? What is it that you are focusing your time and efforts on? And
oh, that's a simple one. God, I'm praying, I'm discerning my future, working out what best way I can serve God and my community. It's a very complicated, long story, but essentially, I'm training for the priesthood. and the Church of England, which I'm a member of, it has gone entirely woke, and there are elements within it that don't want me to be ordained and are preventing that and have the power to do so. So I'm thinking, if that's going to happen, where do I go and what do I do next, and how do I best serve God if the woke church doesn't want me?
I did not grow up in a religious environment. I've taken the time myself to study different religions. What I've always studied and understood about religion is it's supposed to be a very embracing and welcoming community. And yet I hate hearing things that it's, no, you have this idea, so therefore you're not one of us. Like, I've always held religion to, I think, a little bit of contempt, because the way I was taught history, unfortunately, was through the lens of, well, this war was started because this group was this religion and this group was this religion, and they didn't get along, so they started this war. I'm curious, what are you trying to do, without exposing too much of what it is you want to accomplish? How are you trying to fight back against that? How are you essentially trying to cater to or work with those who don't want you working with them?
Well, it's difficult. In my faith in particular, there's a very clear message that needs to be proclaimed, and it is the gospel. And that's all I try to do. I try to speak the truth on the platforms that I've been given. However, that's not always what the institution wants. And when I say the church has gone woke, what I mean is that the hierarchy are more interested in climate change or Brexit or our politicians or transgender issues, all kinds of things that have nothing to do with the faith. And they'd rather people talk about them than the faith. And that's the issue I have, because I will always try, at least, to preach the truth. And if the truth is no longer welcome, then I'll do it elsewhere. But how do I reconcile with people that are opposed to that? I suppose you don't. I suppose some things you can't compromise on. And if they can't see your perspective, then they're in error. And you just have to pray for their conversion.
Do you feel, though, that to a certain degree, everyone has sort of the ability or right to believe what they want to believe, regardless of if they are right or wrong? To a degree, we unfortunately have that freedom in, I think, most Western countries, to have our own thoughts and ideas, and with that comes ideas of across the spectrum.
Not
Um,
everyone has. No, not everyone has. Individuals have the right to believe whatever the hell they want. But if you are if you are a consecrated bishop in a church, you do not have the right to believe whatever you want to believe. You have to believe the creeds. You have to believe in the death and resurrection of our Lord and Savior. For example, if you don't believe those things, then you don't belong in that position. But in general, yes, we all have the freedom, thank God, to believe whatever we want.
is that not a form of censorship?
Oh yeah, of course. It's absolute cancel culture. If you are conservative leaning and or believe in the orthodoxy of the faith, at this point, you're no longer welcome. The gatekeepers will do what they can to keep you out, because they are liberal progressive, and then they think that society has progressed and that we're in a better place now than we were in the past. It's very self-righteous, and they sneer at traditional values, and I think that is the downfall of the faith and of the religion. Rather, there is a difference between faith and religion. And like yourself, I've always been quite skeptical of religion, because it is made up of individuals, and individuals are broken and fallen and get things wrong, and that's the greatest shame, because people need the structure of it.
I have my own definition for the difference between faith and religion. Do you mind sharing yours? Would you be comfortable?
Yeah, sure. So for me, the faith is Christianity. The faith is believing in God, believing that his only begotten Son God became man incarnate to die for our sins and was resurrected so that we have eternal life. That is the faith. Religion is an organized structure of people that try to lead people and bring people into the faith. The whole point of the gospel is to spread the word of God and to save souls for Christ. And to do that, we need a structure, because we can't do it on our own. In the gospel says that when 2 or 3 are gathered, I am there with you. And that is what church is. It's people together. So unfortunately, we can't do it on our own. But when we are doing it together, we often err. And that's why we need as many people as possible, so that we can hold each other to account.
Got it. I mean, look, I always say we always move forward and further together. No different in religion, no different in Bitcoin. I do want to touch a little bit on censorship. I brought it up at the beginning of this episode. Our own YouTube channel was taken away from us at one point, and you yourself dealt with some censorship over on TikTok. I don't need to have you relive that experience, but talk to us a little bit about what you see going on the social media landscape as far as ideas being shared.
Or it happens to me on TikTok all the time. I think I got a video suspended yesterday and I killed it, and it's already back up. But these trolls will just mass report your videos on there and get them taken down. Sometimes when you get them reviewed, they go back up. Sometimes they don't. But it's a case of cultural subversion. It's China laughing their heads off at us because over there, their version of TikTok, which of course is a Chinese app that is funded by the Chinese Communist Party, but over there, their version is very wholesome, and you'll get videos about family life and about being a good citizen and all this stuff, and you won't have constant scrolling. You can only see so many within a time limit, and it's all very, very good. But over here, it's very different. If you're a blue-haired liberal that believes in 99 genders and you believe that the truth is subjective and you own your own truth, you can identify however you like, and it doesn't matter how it affects the world around you, and that if you're white you're a racist, if you're black you're a victim, and all of this nonsense, you're great, your videos will be promoted. If you speak the truth and say, actually, having a X and Y chromosome makes you a male, having XX chromosomes makes you a female, you cannot change your sex. Or if you say, I happen to be black and I'm not a victim, I'm not oppressed, I live in a free democracy where we're all equal under the law, then your videos will get suspended. And the idea there is that literally cultural subversion. It's saying that what used to be objective is now subjective. What used to be truth is now your own personal truth. You can redefine reality around you, and it's destroying things like family values and what I would call Christian values, but you might call other things that have held Western democracies together. And like I say, China is laughing their heads off at us because it's destroying our way of life.
I mean, I've read enough studies that talk about how the top 10 videos that go viral in China on TikTok tend to be more engineering, STEM based, educational, teaching people about math, science, engineering. And then here in America, it's the latest dance craze off of a song that's like 8 years old. And everyone's like, why is this song so popular now? Oh,
when it's degeneracy, it's always a half naked girl. There's always either cleavage or a very short skirt. It's all about degenerating, breaking down family values, breaking down our respect for the opposite sex and all this kind of stuff. And it's on purpose. None of it is by accident. But that's just TikTok. Other big tech have different forms of censorship. Twitter and Facebook think they are the arbiters of truth. They think they have the moral high ground, and we saw that they can be very clearly wrong. What did they do last week? They allowed people to publish death threats towards Russians because it's now appropriate, because Russia are the world's bad guys, whereas you can't post death threats to other people. And it's like, well, why is this morally right and that's not morally right? And then at the same time, Facebook said you can't post, a couple of years ago, you can't post any theories about Wu flu coming from a lab in China, even though that's the most likely cause, and now we know most probably was the most likely cause, but you weren't allowed to publish it because they said it was inappropriate to talk about. Who are they to say what's true and what's not true? And Twitter taking down a sitting president of the United States of America, supposedly the most powerful man in the world, got silenced by a geek at a computer. That shows how powerful these companies are. They own the marketplace of ideas. They own the information superhighways, and they're not afraid to use that power.
Yeah, definitely. And chime in here, Calvin. I've loved listening to you and Q talk so far. But I know there's been a lot of theories saying if you were China or another country trying to usurp the United States or just Western beliefs and democracies, to Q's point, saying like, and even to your point of people being like half naked or, just a trend about someone dancing, wouldn't you want to push that to the other opposing people you're trying to topple to try and get them dumbed down or just not learn anything new while, pushing innovation, engineering, and new things on TikTok and other social media platforms?
Yeah, I mean, look at what's happening in the Ukraine. Men are standing up to fight for their nation. Over here, we can't even say what a man is. That's how ridiculous we've become. Our police forces are painting rainbow flags on their police cars. Over there, they're taking over tanks. It's the parallels, the juxtaposition between Western so-called democracies and the East at the moment is black and white. We've lost our way. We really have, and we're no longer a threat. And if you are, people keep talking about this idea that diversity is our strength, but in the rest of the world, strength is strength. Russia knows what strength is. Ukraine knows what strength is. Over here, we think strength is having more brown faces, or having people of different sexualities flaunting their. This whole idea, the whole LGBT pride thing, just really frustrates me, because I don't really care who you're sleeping with, and I don't want to see your genitals. Thank you very much.
Tying this back into Bitcoin, I know. I know. No, tying this back into Bitcoin now. I know with you were kind of saying there's like different tiers to religion, and I'm kind of stealing this from Alex Svetsky. He's a Bitcoiner, but he talks about religion in three facets. So there's the religion itself, or the philosophy, as we can call it. Then there's the religious interpretation, which can go up to a single individual or even a congregation such as a church. And then there's the religion, the organization. Obviously, normally things corrupt top down, meaning that, the organizations, whether it's the Catholic Church, that's what I'm associated with. I could see a lot of the woke ideology seeping into it, or even the political nature of backing certain candidates globally, worldwide. And I'm sure you see the same thing in the Church of England. But once you get back to the truth of the actual text of the Bible or whatever religion, barring that it's not causing harm to other individuals, I think that's really what it is. And when we're getting back to the source of money, I see that as Bitcoin. Obviously the Catholic Church and churches in general saw a division into Baptist, Calvinism, Protestantism, the Church of England. And I won't say which one is right, but when you break it down to exactly what you were saying of believing in Jesus being the savior, or believing in God, believing in an afterlife, and all these different things, and trying to better yourself to be there, I see Bitcoin as just that asset, where it's the number one. It is truth in terms of money that we've lied and we've bastardized with the fiat system. And I know there's other cryptocurrencies that try and piggyback on top of that, whether they have Bitcoin in their name or they're just a different variation that they've tried to expand. But basically, to your point, it's kind of the scary digital world of CBDCs, or central bank digital currencies, or even just centralized control of it with a different name, painted a different color, a different name, and a different logo. I'd love your insight if you see that the same way about Bitcoin, or if you've ever thought about it like that.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I think that's what the Reformation was all about over here. It was about, the Catholic Church had become too corrupt. It had moved too far away from the truth. And it was about returning to scripture, return to the source. And I think that's a very good ideology. Always return to the source. In regards to Bitcoin, I think we have to be careful in these analogies, because we don't want to seem like we're worshiping money or worshiping a financial system. But I get where you're going with it. I don't know if Bitcoin, like I said earlier, if Bitcoin is the answer, or if it's an early concept of an answer. And it certainly raises the right questions. I'd like to see how we get from where we are now to where we want to be. I don't know what that from A to C, how we get, I don't know what B is in terms of mass take up.
Sorry, I have a comment, because I think one thing that I'm thinking about as you're talking about this, and we talk for a moment about, we watch these Ukrainian citizens stand up and fight for their country. I unfortunately think our generation is going to be doing that with the financial markets. We are going to, as an entire world, have to stand up against the WEF. We're going to have to stand up against the IMF, and we're going to have to stand up against this fiat system that's been created, so that my kids, your kids, Chris's kids, Alex's kids can one day just walk into a bank, not even know what a bank is, and just walk into whatever grocery store they want and buy a candy bar, buy whatever they want to buy with Bitcoin. And that UX for them is going to be so easy and clear and precise, because we did the work and we fought that fight so that we could then make it easier for the next generation. It's going to suck for us. That's my choice. It's going to suck. Our generation, it's not going to be pretty. It's not going to be fun. When we're really old and gray and our grandkids are walking around with us, and I have my $100 bill laminated as a bookmark, and they'll ask me, what is that? Let me tell you, this is how I used to buy marijuana before marijuana was legal. Yeah, sorry to interrupt you. That I had to say that before I forgot that. Please continue.
No, because you're spot on. That might be how this works. That might be how the takeover happens, because the fiat system, as we know, is dead, and they're trying to, I don't know what they're trying to do, but we know that the WEF and the world leaders have this this new industrial revolution idea of replacing it with something else. And when that comes to play, when they come up with their new digital currency that is part of a global central bank that they want to control, when they try and push that new currency, maybe that's when the big battle happens. Maybe that's when we stand up and say, actually, we already have our own here, and this we trust more because we control it. It's not controlled by you. So maybe, yeah, maybe the war is coming to us, and that's the solution.
Yeah. And definitely to Q's point, I know he was talking about, we talked about it yesterday, that, you know, when does the system end? When, you know, revolutions begin? I know we've seen the rise in gas prices here in the United States and Canada, especially in Europe. I know things are even worse there, I believe. And, you know, Q brought up a great point. You know, even though energy may be getting more and more expensive, and in turn, everything else, but you really, what's the saying? It's like an army is 3 meals away from a mutiny or whatever. And, you know, that's the same with civilizations and countries. You know, if people can't start putting food on their table, you can have all the gasoline you want, but if you can't feed your family, that's much more important. I know energy and food go hand in hand, but, you know, I'd hate to see a revolution because, you know, with that only comes more bloodshed, more death, starvation, and different things like that. You know, I see Bitcoin as a way to protect your purchasing power as it, you know, tries to fight inflation through that. I don't know if you have any comments on that, Calvin.
I do. I think we've got to be careful and make sure that, like I say, convenience wins, because this isn't going to be as messy as we think it's going to be. I think we've seen already. So over here, for example, we had a system called furlough. So when we had lockdown, if you weren't at work, the government would pay you, and that's basically a universal basic income. And people became reliant on it, and some people still are to an extent. So this is like a testing ground. So they won't just say, okay, the fiat system is dead, we need to introduce something new. It will be drip fed. It will be, actually, we're trying something new. You know, people will get comfortable staying at home, being paid by the government through this digital currency, or they get credits for the government instead of benefits in cash. They'll get special credits that they can spend in certain places, but it'd be worth more than if they've been paid cash or something. You know, it will be introduced to incentivize people to get on board, and it will be very convenient, very easy, and people will buy into it, and the sheeple will be all over it. So the problem there is that Bitcoin needs to be just as attractive to people, and or show them how free they can be with it, because people aren't going to believe that they're being entrapped at the time until it's too late, until they're already stuck in a system, the new system.
I want to give you the opportunity to talk a little bit about some of your comments you made about diversity. I will be quite frank, as someone who grew up in America post 9/11, immigrant from a Middle Eastern country, I felt my fair share of terrorist comments, racism. Let me tell you, going to the airport is still stressful, even though I have TSA pre-check. I will say this at the same time, I also worked in Hollywood, and I absolutely hated when they would be like, this role has to be Black, this role has to be Asian, this role has to be a woman. It got to a point where you're no longer hiring the best people or giving the best people the opportunity. We have overcorrected to a degree, in my opinion. I will always cite this, though. There is a Netflix comedy special by Hassan Minhaj, and it's called Homecoming King, and he talks about his experience growing up just like me, first generation American, growing up in Sacramento. I grew up in Los Angeles, in a suburb. And the stories he shared, I swear to God, I thought that I was the only one in the world who would have experienced a white girl mocking me, saying, oh, you really thought I would ever date you? You didn't think that I said yes to you to go to prom as a joke? Like, that happened to me. And to have someone else in a position of notoriety recount a story that happened to them, very similar to my own experience, helped, I think, normalize my life for me. I'm not saying that helped everyone in my shoes, in my situation, but at least it helped me. I do think, to a degree, representation matters and helps. However, I think we are at this point of overcorrecting. I don't know if you feel the same, or if you think that be gone with it all and just let us have the conversations that we choose to have, and you can go and seek out the conversations that you want.
No, there's somewhere in between. So people do get discriminated against, and people are racist, and we need defense mechanisms against that to make sure that everyone's treated equally under the law. But that doesn't mean you fix discrimination with discrimination. So what you were talking about, for example, this idea against meritocracy, that we promote people because of the color of their skin, that's just as bad to me as people who are holding you back because of the color of your skin. You don't fix one problem, one negative, with a new negative. So the idea is somewhere in between. It's defending people against discrimination. It's not promoting new discrimination. That's how we solve this issue, in my opinion.
I had to ask the question while I had the opportunity to speak to you. I will now let the conversation reign free for Bitcoin going forward. We joke in Bitcoin that Bitcoin fixes this. It seems to be it has its own religious sector, if you will, with the cult of Bitcoin that goes and operates. I don't know where. Joe Rogers, please stop pushing the cult of Bitcoin. We also talk about its philosophical benefits. We talk about it through the monetary lens, of course. We talk about it through a social lens. There is the joke that Bitcoin fixes this. Bitcoin solves a lot of our problems. We've talked ad nauseum today about how Bitcoin can help solve this separation of the financial markets and the state. Are there any other things that you have noticed or learned about Bitcoin during your time exploring it that you think Bitcoin can actually solve other issues or facets as well?
Well, the concept of decentralization could fix a lot of things. One of the problems we talked about earlier was the censorship of big tech. Social media, it could be a force for great good, but at the moment it's controlled by liberal elites in California. So taking them out of the picture, having a decentralized social media platform would be fantastic. Something like Twitter that isn't controlled by fools, where you have freedom of speech and that's backed up by a system would be great. I'm sure there are many areas that we could implement that kind of technology, but it's difficult and no one wants to do it because people always want to maintain the power of the thing that they've created.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a great point. And Calvin, to your example, I know many people think about Bitcoin, they think about the price. Obviously, that's a very attractive idea because you see it going up in value over the long term. Obviously, we're down a little bit from an all-time high, but people also neglect Bitcoin, the network. And when I say that, like, it's the way to send information or value from person to person or in a decentralized manner without anyone stopping you. And a point that I mean to this is there's a company called Zion. They're building a social media platform that's basically what you say. It's not in the hands of big tech. It's in the individual, in the way that we can send value or information peer-to-peer across the Bitcoin Lightning Network. I kind of see the internet right now. Are we like internet maximalists? I know people say Bitcoin maximalists, you're Bitcoin and Bitcoin only, but we're using the internet to talk over Zoom right now. There's different protocols. You could visit websites for your banking, ironically, for websites, for whatever different feature you have. Bitcoin, the network, you can be built on top of for faster payments with the Lightning Network that doesn't need 10-minute transactions or hour-long transaction times to do. It's instantaneous within like fractions of a second. You could build Zion. And like I said, I have no financial interest in this company. I just know it's something that's being built out right now where they're able to send information without a middleman. You can't be censored. And I just thought that that's, a way of Bitcoin being a base layer and then building on top of it things that we want to see fit in this world. I don't know if you've heard about any of those or if any of those has piqued your interest.
Well, I love that because obviously the World Wide Web is just one protocol on the internet, but people conflate the two and think that the World Wide Web is the internet. I suppose people don't need to know the difference between the different protocols. People use email all the time too, and FTP and things like that. But it needs to be, again, easy to use, user-friendly. There needs to be a user interface that people can access it without even knowing any of this stuff and just get on there and use the decentralized platform to spread information.
I completely agree. Right now, Bitcoin still definitely has that cypherpunk coding mentality. It is a small group. We are trying to make it easier by the day to use in terms of all the various apps and platforms and ways to buy it, self-custody and all of that. I hope one day it'll just be as easy as going into your phone and just like looking at an account and sending it. And you don't know anything that goes on in the background. I know I personally don't know how a modem and router works, but I know it gives me Wi-Fi and I know I can get on the internet with it. I know I can talk to you on the Zoom call. I don't know how Zoom is coded or works. I don't know how the internet's coded and works. So, the easier and faster we can get it operating on a more basic level, the better. And I completely agree with that. Q, if there's anything you want to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, Calvin, I watched your comments recently about how it's important for us to recognize both the fact that these social media platforms have the right to allow whatever content they want. They are private businesses, but at the same time, they are currently the information highways for the world. Everything goes through Twitter. I don't look at most mainstream media sources other than if I want a good laugh from time to time, just to hear what the extremists on either side want to talk about. Yeah. I'm curious, though, if we create these echo chambers where, okay, fine, Twitter becomes this left-leaning liberal echo chamber, and then we have places like Zion for anyone who wants more freedom conversations geared towards that, and we slowly start to bifurcate and separate ourselves, does that not set us up, I think, for more conflict down the line over little things, no different than when we had conflicts over, hey, this land is my land. No, arbitrarily the line is drawn here, or arbitrarily, I believe in this God, you believe in that God, so therefore I must hate you. Does it not create those same sort of instincts in humans?
It does, and at the same time, I don't think it works. I don't think echo chambers work. So I'm on Getter, for example, and I find it boring. I don't bother browsing because it's all people that think like me, posting the same content as me. There's no conversation there. There's no level of engagement. I go on Twitter and I'm meeting different people, having different conversations, and I'm being challenged and I'm challenging people. And yes, sometimes it gets heated and I have to step away, but without difference, life is boring, and without difference, social media is boring. So these apps, unless they encourage people from different backgrounds that actually have some true diversity, they won't work.
I hope from your lips to God's ears, my friend.
Yeah, Calvin, I know we want to be respectful of your time. We're coming up on that hour mark, and I know you got to go. I'd love to definitely send you the information from Alex Svetsky, a couple of his articles talking about the different facets of religion, and not that he compares Bitcoin and religion, but basically how it corrupts. And I think he has some really good perspectives, and I'll definitely send you some information on Get Zion's the name of the website, but Zion in particular is the name of the platform about decentralizing social media. Q, if there's anything else you want to ask Calvin before we let him go.
Just where can our viewers find more of you, learn more about you, and hear more from you?
Good question. I don't really have anything to promote. My website is calvinrobinson.com, but you can find me on all the usual social platforms until I get banned. It's just usually Calvin Robinson.
Alrighty, guys. Well, thank you so much, Calvin, for joining us. Best of luck. I know it's getting late over there as well, and you're about to head off. So thank you so much for your time. Guys, we're going to cut to a short commercial break before we regroup before Fedwatch. You know the drill. Use code YTMAG, get 10% off of your conference tickets so that Chris and I can keep our jobs on the other side of the conference. We're just 2 weeks out. 2 weeks. All right, guys, stick around. What is up, guys? We are back. Yes, I am having a bad hair day. It's kind of annoying, but it is what it is. Chris and I are going to just be talking to the whoever's listening right now until we get a new episode of Fedwatch. We'll be joined by Ansel and CK in about 15 minutes. But one thing that I do want to highlight, because this was news we talked about yesterday, there's still rumblings about this. I think it could be a truly any moment in the next week. I'm going to give it, I don't buy into the next 24 hours. Honduras, Bitcoin, legal tender. Unless I missed something, Chris, I don't think that this has officially been passed. We just continue to see more rumors swirling about this.
Yeah, sorry. I was checking something else. The rumors swirling around what again? It was
Honduras.
The Honduras. I'm not sure. Yeah, it's been tough to verify. I know there was talks about Guatemala, or I forget if it's Guatemala or Argentina. I don't know the flags that well, but I know that's where our good friend Samson Mao is currently located. trying to orange pill, I'm sure, leaders there.
So Samson's in Guatemala. The issue I have with some of this Honduras stuff that we're looking at, it's not from, and I hate to say it like this, but it's not some, we're getting trolled with that stuff.
Yeah, the Honduras stuff, I think, was from one of the meme factories accounts.
I was gonna say, I genuinely don't know any of these sources, which is why I kind of like grain of salt on a lot of this. But my source of reason for a lot of this is the fact that before Samson Mao literally had to post retracted coffee in retracted to not highlight where he is or what country the coffee he is drinking is from. He did highlight the fact that he is in Guatemala drinking Guatemalan coffee and it is delicious. And then Honduras, their like official Twitter account was just like sending crying emojis as though he like ghosted them and is on a date with another country now. Look, Bitcoin is for everyone. It can work in Honduras. It can work in Guatemala. You're both neighbors with El Salvador. It's beautiful. It's a beautiful little orange section of the world, of the globe. And I cannot wait for the next image of a satellite taking a picture of North, Central, and South America, and for Bitcoiners to literally start drawing just bright neon orange around El Salvador and then hopefully Honduras and Guatemala. I also want to highlight, because there's been a lot of stuff sort of cooking about this. For those of you who, I don't know, live under a rock, don't want to hang out with us, don't want to come to Miami, or just can't afford it. I know there are some of you in that boat. We are really excited that we will have a really fun, interesting, unique, one-of-a-kind stream for the conference. But if you actually want to be there and you want to be a part of that experience, use code YTRAG, get 10% off of your conference tickets, because otherwise there's going to have to be a fight to the death to who returns to the show after the conference. And that fight to the death will be at the conference as well. So like 2 for 1, you get a little bit of a Bitcoin conference, and then you get to see Chris and I duke it out to see who will return on the other side of the conference. We will be in Miami. I will be there in 12 days, 13 days. So the conference itself starts in 15 days. It is the final countdown. Can we do something? We're going to do something fun for that. We're going to do something fun. But the real thing we want to do for fun, 69K followers. We are 1,500 followers away from hitting, 1,400 followers away from hitting the elusive 69K followers. If you guys can help us out and help us get over this edge before the end of the month, we will make it rain so many sats. You won't know what to do with all of those sats other than to send it to your hard drive wallet. That should be the only thing you do with your sats. Nothing else. Don't spend your sats right now, or spend it on a Bitcoin 22 ticket. But for the most part, you should just be stacking sats. In fact, I wanted to introduce a new segment called Stacking Sats, where live on air right now, I'm just going to buy a little bit of Bitcoin, and I hope you will follow suit. Chris, are you down? Should we stack some sats together?
Yeah, I can do that right now.
All right. I'm going to use Strike. Shout out Jack Mahlers, because Strike is the cheapest and best way to do this. I'm just going to do a little mini stack. I do a $5 buy every hour anyways already. So I'll do, you know what? We'll just tack on another $5 right now.
Yep. I'm doing a $5 buy right now as we speak.
And I hope all of you at home are, no, Alex, I'm not sending you any Bitcoin. You can stack sats at home right now with us, and all of our transactions, if we confirm these in the next 10 minutes, I'm just going to say, do it for the views. No, go away. Go away. How do we kick Alex out of this chat? Everyone watching, go ahead, stack some sats. If you can't do $5, do 50 cents. Do $1. Doesn't matter. Stack a little bit right now. Your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren, heck, yourself at age 65 is going to say thank you for having done it right now on air with us. And we can all be on the same block. Yay.
Did my mini stack. I'm all good on my end.
Throw it in the comments. How many sats did you just snag up? How many did you snatch up regularly? I see you, Hammersaw, you buy sats daily. How many sats are you stacking daily? I personally think the daily buy is the way to go. If you can do it hourly, even better. I have a very aggressive strategy. I don't know if I've ever shared this with you. I think I have.
I don't know. Go tell me again. Enlighten me. Enlighten the viewers.
So before
Best way to buy is with other people's money. Alex is.
Well, Alex clearly was not listening to yesterday's episode when I was talking about my friend who I finally orange pilled, got him to download Strike. He bought $10 worth of Bitcoin with the free $10. And then he's like, I'm on a mission to go and convince so many people to download this app so that I could end up buying a whole Bitcoin with just my referral $10. So as of right now, you need 4,200 more referrals off you, even though I know you're not watching, but good luck with that. Keep buying Bitcoin with other people's money. I know you're making Alex McShane proud. But my strategy was simple-ish, $25 a day. That was the buy amount, $25 a day. If the price went down from where I bought yesterday, then I add $5 to my buy. So if it goes from 42.5 to 4,200, I'm now doing $30. And then, it went down again the next day. Now it's 35. Every subsequent day, it goes down consecutively. I will add $5 to the buy. I've had it go as high as $120 when I ripped it last year, all the way from 62K down to about, I think it was 30, somewhere in the 30s where I bottomed out. I got it up to like $120, $120 buy in a day. And then literally the first update, it resets at 25, and then you keep stacking as it goes down. That way you benefit and you stack more sats at a cheaper price, while at the same time you're able to stack daily regardless of the price action, because the price is just fiat denominated in. I don't know, doesn't matter.
Q, I'm not gonna lie, it sounds very convoluted, and it sounds like you're very short Bitcoin because you have way too much fiat. That's just my mentality of it.
I will say this, I have a lot of fiat right now. And I know what to do with it, especially like yesterday's conversation with Dr. Jeff Ross, which if you did not get a chance to, please make sure you go back and watch that, helping us break down a lot of what's going on in the markets. I know that Ansel and CK will be doing that as well, with Fedwatch in just a moment. But one of the things we talked about yesterday is, having some dry powder ready to go ahead and just dump it in on this next fall off. I think trying to time the market is a fool's game. But at the same time, I hate saying it like this, but I think there's more downside to go. And I have a hard time feeling comfortable buying up sats in the 40s when I am a firm believer that there's gonna be sats to be bought in the low 30s and possibly the 20s. I don't know, Chris, if you are as bearish as I am.
Boo, bearish Q, boo. I used even the sound, the boo sound on the stream. Yeah, no, I don't know. I know Jeff was talking about, he thinks it's going to go down, but we've rallied up about a few $1,000s. I hope he's not getting wrecked on his shorts. Personally, I don't trade. I know his hedge fund, he probably has ways to stop loss, but I think, I don't know. I'm not sure. Alex is saying Luna will take care of us, the altcoin that is buying a lot of Bitcoin right now. Well, that remains
Luna or Terra.
I think it's Luna Terra, or I don't know. It's one of them.
I mean, look, I think there's validity in that, so long as you have something that is actually on a Bitcoin standard for once, other than Bitcoin itself. I don't know why you would not just own Bitcoin if you have the free cash flow to go ahead and own it, but for all intents and purposes, you are starting to see semblances of a Bitcoin standard be introduced in different marketplaces, both in private businesses with the likes of MicroStrategy, Block, Tesla holding Bitcoin on their balance sheet. You also, oh shit, cameras on, gloves are off. The MMA fighter is here. I said something wrong, guys. I said too many wrong things, and it triggered Alex McShane to show up.
What's up, Q? No, I agree. I agree with what you're saying. I agree with your strategy, and I think there's more pain to be had. It's probably good to have a little dry powder on the side. I just can't do it. When I have more fiat, what happens is I end up consuming more bullshit. And when I have all my money in Bitcoin, I don't consume anything. So my strategy is just go all in.
What are you wasting your money on? What are you wasting your money on that we got to text you about to be like, stop buying that shit?
Food.
Alex always tells me it's food is his weakness.
Yeah, it's
you don't
food.
cook enough, do you?
He's
no, I cook all the time.
He's been posting more pictures of him and the wife out at dinner.
Dude,
so
he's
I know
always
it's
posting
been-
pictures of him and his wife at like a nice dinner. I'm high-key convinced they went to one dinner and took like a series of 50 pictures at this dinner.
No. We go to the same restaurant.
Okay. 'cause
It's
I
the
was
same.
about
It
to
is.
say-
It is the same restaurant every time. But yeah. But no, I spent a lot of money on food. That's about it, really. Yeah.
I mean, I guess we could transition to Fedwatch right now, guys. I see all of our Fedwatch people here in the Zoom chat. If only you guys viewing on the other end could see it as well. Shout out Eastside Tony. I literally told you this story when we met at a San Francisco Bitcoin meetup. We're gonna cut to a commercial break. You know who it is. You know what it is. Use code YTMAG, get 10% off your conference ticket so Chris and I can keep our jobs. We'll be back after a short commercial break, and we'll be joined by CK Ansel for Fedwatch. What is up, fam? Thank you for coming back. And you know the drill. I'm gonna hand the mic off to CK and Ansel and chime in when they don't want me to.
Awesome. Yo, welcome back to another episode of Fedwatch. This is a very special episode. We have a lot to talk about. A lot happened in macro the last 2 weeks since we've had a show. And we also have a very distinguished guest with us, Benjamin Dichter. Did I pronounce that right?
Yes,
who
you
is
did.
one
Yes, you
of he's one of the key players behind the truckers convoy and movement in Canada, and now that has kind of spread across the globe. So it will be really fascinating to chat about what's happening in that subject matter, as well as get his takes on everything in macro as well. What's up, Ben?
Cool. Thanks for having me, guys. It's an honor and a privilege to be here with you. Really, I've always been one of those quiet Bitcoiners behind the scenes that, I follow stuff online. I learn, I watch BT sessions video or BTC sessions and everybody else, and been catching up and learning on my own and trying to orange pill family members, friends, and the occasional politician I've known behind the scenes. And I've had some success there. I know of a couple of party leaders who hold Bitcoin and a couple of MPs who bought Bitcoin well over a year ago. It's a long process, but I'm not center stage Bitcoin guy. So this is very odd for me because I know all of you. I'm aware of all of you and been following everybody throughout the years. So it's an honor.
Absolutely, man. Well, again, it'll be interesting to hear a little bit about what's happening in Canada. So I guess why don't you kind of catch us up with that side of things, which is like, post the breakup of the convoy, media really slowed down a lot. There's a little bit of fallout, but what's the current status and what should the Bitcoiners out there kind of keep top of mind?
Well, it's funny what you say about media quieting down. I actually just got a text message like 2 minutes ago from somebody at what I call the fake news Toronto Star. asking me for an interview, and it's another one of those legacy media outlets that I refuse to ever speak to, because they're funded by the government. That's the big problem of what's happening in Canada. You'll also notice there's been a number of stories from the CBC, which is, for people who don't know, that's our equivalent of the BBC or national broadcaster or ABC in Australia. They have already retracted 2 of their what I call fake news, fake articles, fake stories, whatever it is. Which is why I took the strategy I did with media throughout the convoy, which was to circumvent all Canadian legacy media that's funded by the government and focus either on supportive US media or predominantly independent media, new upstarts, creators, objectivist sort of media. So in our press conferences, we had, Epoch Times, the Post Millennial, the National Telegraph, Ken Bexty, a bunch of independent creators as well. And it became their moment to shine. And that's why our press conferences weren't 15 minutes of scripted questions. They were an hour, 2 hours, 2.5 hours long. And anybody could ask whatever question they wanted. And True North as well. It's another well-known outlet in Canada. So when you say things have died down, yeah, they've died down a little bit intentionally on our side, just because we won't grant interviews to legacy media. And we also have something in the works that we're working towards. And one of my big priorities, which is Bitcoin Miami, and bringing that to the forefront to people within the trucking industry, people who are aware of the blue collar workers in Canada, who previously were very, in some cases, hostile, people affiliated with the convoy. When I mentioned Bitcoin, you should have seen. And I'm like, guys, let me explain to you what it is. It's not what you think. But luckily, there were a number of truckers who already were orange pilled previously. And because of the good work of Caribou and the Bitcoin community as a whole, and some significant people who were able to raise funds via the Tally coin, it was the only way any truckers were able to get any money, because in effect, the government stole the money. All those donations, with the exception of everything that both Give, Send, Go returned, which was about $9 million, and GoFundMe returned, which was another $9 million, everything else was seized. And you ask, well, how was it seized? Well, first, the government, the provincial government, I'll be very quick with this, basically blocked the funding, and the federal government tried to build a narrative around the idea that this was in any way related to terrorism, which is crazy, absolutely crazy. And luckily, FinTrack and the RCMP have come out officially on the record in parliamentary hearings and saying that's completely ridiculous. These were people involved in a political movement. They believed it. But they did what often happens on the other side, is they used lawfare. So they have this fallacious lawsuit of the trauma and horror that the day and a half of honking, that's as long as the honking went on for the most part, the trauma to the community. So they filed a class action lawsuit, and suspiciously they would agree to terms and conditions with the injunction that was imposed upon us if we agreed to hand over all the money to an escrow agent. So all the remaining money that was received, fiat money, has now been turned over into escrow. The lawyers and the bankruptcy trustee have it. That money is going to be used, to litigate this fallacious lawsuit. And then whatever is remaining is going to go to the truckers. But I can tell you now, knowing how the system works, they're going to litigate and litigate and litigate and litigate. That's why they have so many defendants, because they know they can bleed out the money that's there. How much is there, which will be the next question? I believe it's around $5 million, if I'm not mistaken. There was 1.5 that was seized by TD Bank, so don't trust your banks. And there was another 3.5 million, if I'm not mistaken. Again, I didn't deal with the money. We had a treasurer on the board that was his responsibility. but I believe there's another $3.5 million that was sitting in Stripe that I think has also been handed over to escrow. So that's the status of things now, engaging and dealing with lawfare, which is why my team, the PR side of things, have been working on something that we're going to be releasing between now and the Bitcoin conference.
All right. Well, obviously, we are working very hard to make the Bitcoin conference great. So it's really exciting to hear that you're going to leverage that platform and release something interesting and pertinent. Can you talk a little bit about in terms of like central bank trust kind of in the West and in Canada in general? How was what happened in Canada and then later what we saw happen amongst the fallout and sanctions because of Ukraine? How has that kind of affected trust in the existing system, and how are you seeing people react to that?
Well, if you're asking first on a personal level, myself, trust in central banking, I'm a huge fan of George Gammon. So that will give you an idea of my level of trust in the central bank. It's, you know, we all focus on the US Federal Reserve more than the Bank of Canada, just because anybody who understands how the global economic system works, we all know it stems from the Fed. In Canada's case, our equivalent, the Bank of Canada, has been outprinting the United States. So as bad as the US has been deflating their currency, we've been one-upping them. It's been much worse in Canada. But the problem is most people don't understand it, and they haven't for generations. I mean, who is it? Henry Ford said, if people understood how the financial system worked, there would be a revolt tomorrow, something to that effect. So we know most people are, it's not that they're even apathetic, it's too complex for a lot of people, they just don't get it. But that seems to be changing. That is what, you know, guys like yourself are doing, the Bitcoin community, George Gammon, Lynn Alden, I don't know, Real Vision, all of these platforms that now exist where the average person has access to a simple, almost infotainment way of learning how pathetic our financial system is. The level of trust is definitely waning, even amongst people who don't understand how it works. It's getting to the point where, okay, I don't really understand it, but I definitely don't trust it now. And the biggest thing, I love how Pompliano put it, that Justin Trudeau is the chief marketing officer for Bitcoin. Because a little known fact behind the scenes, everybody in government knows this, it's finally starting to trickle out. I'll let you know this first. The day that happened, or the days that happened, $1.2 trillion came out of Canada's economy. People were withdrawing money, elderly people were withdrawing money from their bank accounts, mass sums of cash. These are people not political, they're apolitical, but once they hear the government is freezing their money, what do they think? They think the 1930s, the Great Depression, seizing gold. Bail-ins is a word they don't understand, but they've heard before in the media. And the best way to scare people is uncertainty. So the level of uncertainty that brought to Canada's economy is crazy. And, you know, for the Americans, remember, when I say $1.2 trillion, we are 10% of your population. That's the equivalent of $10 trillion like that being wiped out of your economy. And I do know some very high net worth, you know, VIP people, if you will, industrious people who are known figures, who all told me they're done. They're pulling everything out of Canada. They may still keep a house there, but that's it. All their money's going either to an offshore, another country, and Bitcoin, as well as precious metals and stuff. But this has been amazing for Bitcoin. I don't know if you watch the YouTuber Crypto Daily from England. All of this stuff is good for Bitcoin. It's definitely good for Bitcoin.
I have a follow-up for you on the mechanics of what this looked like. So how did the government stop the transactions from going to the banks or freeze them at the banks? And then how did they freeze some of the Bitcoin? You mentioned Strike. I heard some other Bitcoin seizures happened. Can you walk us through like the mechanics of that?
Okay, so first, not Strike, Stripe. You know, the payment processor Stripe that's
Oh,
used
Stripe.
by,
Okay. Yep.
yeah, it was Stripe. So that's fiat money. That's not crypto money. So it happened on all levels of government here. So we have, you know, our municipal, provincial, and federal levels of government. On the provincial level, Doug Ford, a conservative, by the way. So this is not, you know, a partisan issue. So when people do the left-right divide, that's meaningless and bullshit. And this is the perfect example of that. So on the provincial level, the conservative Doug Ford had his attorney general. He went to court to put an injunction on any monies collected for the Freedom Convoy to be declared illegal. I'm not a lawyer. I can ask my lawyer for the terminology, but he essentially blocked any of those monies from being collected. That's why when TD Bank got the money, boom, it was frozen. That was the first transfer from GoFundMe. The first $1.4 million that they transferred to the convoy organizers, the other organizers. So that's one side. And then on the federal level, what the federal did is, you know, that wasn't authoritarian enough. You know, seizing the donations, that's not enough. We got to double down on this. So we got to go full Fidel Castro. And they then just blocked us from being banked. Like I was completely debanked. I had my line of credit, my personal accounts, corporate accounts, credit cards, everything. Nothing would work. And the way I found out was after I left the hotel, the downtown area, I went to somebody kind of in the rural areas of Ottawa and stayed there for a while. I went to order food because I just arrived, whatever, you know, was going to order dinner at least and figure out what we're going to do while working. And boom, my credit card was denied. It was denied again. And then I logged on, went onto my TD bank account, and my entire transaction history was gone. Like I had never done a transaction. So my bookkeeper wouldn't be able to reconcile my books at that point. You know, for my trucking business, I have a bookkeeper. Couldn't do anything. And so it was 7 or 8 days, if I'm not mistaken, that if I was living exclusively on fiat, I wouldn't have been able to buy medicine with my broken ankle. That's why I have the crutches. I wouldn't have been able to buy food. I was the person. I told Jordan Peterson on the phone, I said, you know, it's like we would learn about living in the Middle Ages where people would be banished from the town square and from the town. They'd be sent off to the outside of the walls of the city to starve. And that's what Justin Trudeau tried to do. He took this Stalinist approach and used the banking system to try to starve us. Now, luckily in my case, and you guys understand this, and by the way, it didn't even occur to me, I could have just gone to a Bitcoin ATM and converted Bitcoin for fiat if I really needed food, right? Or I could have found businesses that are starting to pop up that would accept Bitcoin. But, you know, we're still in the early stages and I've never sold my Bitcoin. And I don't want to do that, at least not for a while, right? But so that's kind of what was good. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. And I guess as a follow-up to that then is what kind of Bitcoin products were most helpful? And what kind of infrastructure or products do you think Bitcoin developers or entrepreneurs can be focusing on to help mitigate this type of attack in the future?
That's a very good question. So there are, I mean, there's so many Bitcoin products as we know now, and there's so many places where people are trying to onboard businesses and individuals. And I think what's happened is this has opened up the door for regular people who still don't understand Bitcoin. They're a little bit confused, but like DJ said in a Spaces we said the other day, he made the point, you don't understand how your car works, but you use it anyways, right? So I think that's the narrative we've got to push forward and to just say, listen, this is the financial system 2.0. It's Barnes and Nobles versus Amazon. So you might as well just get familiar with the space and get comfortable with it, because maybe your government's going to decide we're going to block you out from the banking system, or your bank becomes hostile, or you never know, or there's suspicious transactions that have nothing to do with you. And we see how overzealous financial institutions are sometimes when it comes to responding, right? And this just becomes a hedge against a system that is antiquated and old and needs to be replaced. And it's now so easy to sell, because then you say, well, look what happened to those truckers in that convoy, whether you agree or not. They couldn't buy food. So Bitcoin will allow you to do that. So I think that's one end of it. The other side is, I think I haven't been to Bitcoin Beach yet. I've traveled all throughout Latin America, so I've been trying to go there since COVID started. And hopefully after the conference, I'm going to Colombia next week. And then hopefully after I come back to the Bitcoin conference, I'll be able to squeeze in a trip there. But from what I understand and everything I've researched about it and heard on everybody's podcast about it, that is a template that we can start to roll out to small businesses in the Western world, which I think it's more difficult sell in the Western world than it is in countries like Argentina and Brazil and Mexico and stuff, right? Now, on a personal level, prior to buying my truck a few years ago, I used to have a business on a university campus in downtown Toronto, which is why maybe sometimes people say you don't look like a trucker. I've done many different things, right? And if I had my business now, I'd first say I would have been bankrupt because of COVID. I mean, there's no question in my mind. We would have to close our doors. But had I survived, now I would be definitely in a position, even though I was a Bitcoin supporter then, there was really no need, 6 years ago on a regular retail business on a university campus to have Bitcoin. But now, if I was in that position and I saw what happened, now I would definitely be listening. So I think people in the space, and I think of Square and Jack Dorsey and all of us who are, we're a whole range of different political viewpoints and philosophical worldviews. But I think now is the time for us all to come together to start to reach out to small businesses and say, much like in my first example, that, hey, here's your second option. So you're accepting Visa and MasterCard. Why don't you accept Bitcoin? You have a Square terminal. They have this option here. It acts, this is how I use the Michael Saylor analogy to teach people. I say it acts like a bank account and a currency. It's there if you need to use it or not, and figure out what products can we come up with that small businesses need. And I think that will help with adaptation, especially on university campuses that have a lot of foreign students that are on student visas that have come from abroad. They're sending remittance to their parents, or in some cases, their parents are well off and are sending money to them to be students in a Western university. I think that's a huge opportunity for us. And I think now is the time to really start pushing that.
So Ben, I want to take it back specifically to the convoy and the fallout. And I want to ask, one, what's the current status with Tamara? Because I've not been following her. And I know that at one point she was not released from bail because of mischief, which is a little insane. But what's the current status on her? And then I guess, has your bank account been restored? Like, what's happening with the bank freezes and things like that?
Okay, so first, Tamara is back home. She has been released. It was, I don't know, a couple weeks ago now. She ended up spending, I think, just over 2 weeks in jail on a mischief charge. And I think I may have mentioned in this interview, other interviews, I have family that are in policing. And I have lots of friends who are in policing, we were texting each other throughout the entire convoy and throughout the crackdown, and them telling me what the hell is going on. And they were explaining to me, the politicization within police forces, that there's a push and pull going on within police forces across not just Canada, but the US, politicians who want to use them for political purposes, and then the old school officers who want to go tell them to go fly a kite. So there's that's going on. So that they were explaining to me the charge of mischief. 3 officers, friends of mine, said to me, "I've never even laid this charge. It's a charge we use to get kids to leave the park when they're smoking dope. That's what mischief is for. We're going to arrest you for mischief if you don't disperse. All right, fine, dude, we'll go." That's what mischief is for. It is something that can be convicted based on a summary judgment, is my understanding. Again, I'm not a lawyer, learning through all of this. Another example of something that's conviction by a summary judgment would be a parking ticket. So that's the level of criminality. I mean, it's not criminal. That was the charge. It was the aiding and abetting they tried to apply on top to mischief, which has never happened before, of them trying to make it, again, through political means, to make it into a criminal action, which good luck in court, I guess. If we still have a judicial system, this should have been thrown out immediately. The judge that presided over Tamara's case was a candidate for Justin Trudeau in 2011. So we have a big problem. This is an increasing problem occurring in Canada, where these appointed judges are being appointed because of political favors exclusively. And it's been going on for a while, but it's just gotten to the point where it's become so partisan now at this point. And it was funny how Prime Minister Blackface Diversity, who is all about diversity and identity politics, he refers to us as white supremacists. Now, Tamara she's Native and Métis and a woman. I'm Jewish, but we're the white supremacists and the neo-Nazis. Explain to me how that happens. But that's the clown world that we live in, and it's so frustrating. So to answer your question, Tamara was eventually released after, I think, the 3rd bail hearing. The 3rd. And by the way, they brought her in shackles, like it was freaking Shawshank Redemption. Again, Native woman. She's a pillar of her community. Everybody knows who she is because she's been involved in so many humanitarian causes in her city, and as well as, she was an advocate for the energy sector because she's worked in the energy sector for many, many years, which is another reason I don't like her, right? She's Métis and she's a woman and she's very professional and she works in the oil and gas sector, right? So yeah, you're a woman and you have an identity until your politics are wrong. It's kind of like how Larry Elder, the Black libertarian, is somehow a white supremacist. Sour version of the same thing.
So Ben, just to kind of stay on like the convoy, talking about what happened with the Bitcoin distribution and things like that, I think a lot of Bitcoiners like saw that as, being a little bittersweet. Like, yes, we donated this money. Yes, some of it got distributed, but it was pretty sloppy. A lot of people put themselves at risk because of it. It was a very much an evolving situation where a lot of funds were brought together and, not a lot of privacy best practices were leveraged. I guess, can you talk a little bit about like maybe some of the learnings from like the Bitcoin fundraising experience in general, and then we can jump over to talking about central banking more generally.
Yeah. Okay. Well, in terms of, you got to remember, I was sitting in a hotel with a broken leg, getting thousands of messages from certain media, media organizations, as well as alternative and whatever. So I spent most of my time doing interviews and helping my team with press releases and all that sort of stuff. That's the majority of what I did. I was the only one there who had any understanding of Bitcoin. And when I say understanding, like when I was told by them that they're going to set up a multi-sig wallet, I thought, okay, this such a thing exists. I guess it sounds cool. How does it work? So there was a lot of learning on my end. In terms of building the infrastructure, I'm still trying to figure it out now. Like I don't know. Like I know they set up Tallycoin. I actually want to reach out to DJ Booth and ask him about it, how it all works, because I'm still learning myself. I'd never heard of an XPub. I now know what an XPub is. So again, my knowledge of Bitcoin has always been to the level where I can bring new people in. I'm not, I try to be technical, but there's only so much I can do, right? So the entire infrastructure of distribution, that was held by Caribou and that team who had done it. And I still don't, like they told me they were going to put together paper wallets and they're going to try to protect people's identities and whatever. And I'm like, okay, cool. Sounds good. I trust you. I'll still try to figure out this multi-sig thing, but go with God. You have my blessing on this sort of thing. And much like the convoy itself, it took on a life of its own. Like it was so large that it became, like all these advocacy things. I mentioned this before in previous things that, they grow really great because everybody's enthusiastic and motivated. But at some point, you have to have some level of bureaucracy that can just manage things and manage the communication between people, right? And that became almost an impossible task for the convoy. Like we did what we could. And but again, it took on a life of its own. I get the impression the same thing happened on the Bitcoin end of things. Like they didn't anticipate this amount of money coming so quickly. And I think when it got to 1.2 million dollars or something like that, they cut it off. And because I think they just got scared at the amount of money and they realized they have to distribute it. They didn't know how. They had to build an infrastructure. And I've heard from different people, and maybe I'm excited for this conference to learn a lot of the back end stuff that I still don't know. I was in a space and some people were sending me some messages saying the way they distributed the Bitcoin they could have done it better. It was overly complicated because A, B, and C and the wallets they used. I'm like, I guess. So I don't really know that part of it. I know they were trying to do their best to keep at least I was told, to keep it as pseudo-anonymous as possible. Whether they were successful or failed, I don't know. It seemed to be that like when the remaining Bitcoin that is apparently now in custody as part of this whole what's it called, the class action suit, that it's in escrow. I can't remember how, I don't know exactly how many, maybe it's 5 Bitcoin, something like that, 4 or 5 Bitcoin. Could be a little bit more, don't hold me to that. But that was, the media was reporting that Bitcoin had been blocked. The Bitcoin of the convoy was blocked. No, it was seized and voluntarily handed over under duress. And what the police actually did is they showed up at Caribou's place with a warrant from a judge who is known for just rubber stamping anything, which is another problem that happens in the legal system. And they so they arrived at his place. They seized his microphone. I guess he thought they was trading Bitcoin with on a mic, so his podcast mic, private, some private material, his computer, his phone, all sorts of stuff. And apparently, they asked him for the seed phrase because there was a warrant and a court order, whatever. And I guess you can confirm with him. I mean, he's going to be at the conference, by the way. He handed it over to them, and they immediately transferred it into a police wallet. I'm not so sure that's legal in an investigation. I mean, I'm sure they'll try to use the Emergencies Act, under the guise of, terrorism investigation. But now the police have come out and said, no, there was no such thing. So they might have some legal problems from us coming forward. So that's a little bit what was going on.
Very interesting, and that's some very good context. Again, it's really exciting to hear that at least some semblance of normalcy has returned, and it'll be really exciting to meet you and Caribou and other Canadians who were kind of part of the experience, more hands-on in Miami. I know everyone on this call will be there, so that's really exciting.
Cool. That's awesome.
I want to pivot over to Ansel. We want to kind of get your thoughts and sentiment on some of the things that have been happening in macro. Obviously, the Fed raised rates. a little bit here in the US.
Yeah, they're
so
only
that's-
what 15 years late.
something to talk about. Something to talk about. But yeah, I'll hand it off to Ansel to direct the conversation.
Yeah, so Benjamin, I don't know if you're a fan specifically of Fedwatch, but here on Fedwatch, we try to understand Bitcoin's future by understanding central banks. You know what they're, because Bitcoin is going to become the global reserve currency. So, you know, we want to understand what the actual architecture is out there and how it actually works to understand Bitcoin's future. So anyway, yeah, today I just have some updates on the Fed, and then on, let's see, I had a whole list of stuff to talk about: the Fed, yield curve, sanctions in Russia, and then a food shortage. So what I'll do here is I'll just talk through a few things, and then I'll stop and we can chat about it. So, okay. First,
and if I don't know, I'll just cut you off and say I'm just a trucker. I don't know.
Okay. All right. So first thing up is Sarah Bloom Raskin, and we've talked about her a couple times here on the show. She was nominated by Biden for vice chairman of the Fed, head of supervision at the Fed. And I wrote an article for Bitcoin Magazine about 6 weeks ago on how she's kind of troublesome for the Fed and for Bitcoin specifically. Well, now it looks like she has withdrawn her name from being the vice chair. The controversy was helped along by Cynthia Loomis, who is a friend of Bitcoin.
She's amazing.
They're from Wyoming. She raised some ethical concerns about Raskin's behavior. And then, you know, she's basically a progressive globalist, and they've been trying to sneak these progressive globalists onto the central bank or onto the Fed's board for a long time. They tried to put Lael Brainerd on there instead of Powell, but Powell ended up getting the nod. And I believe that Sarah Bloom Raskin was a consolation for not going with Lael Brainerd. They said, okay, well, Raskin can be vice chair. So that's how you progressives can have your spot on, you know, important spot at the Fed. Well, now that's over. And throughout all of my stuff today, I kind of have a thread of this growing clash between the Fed and the administration, or on a global scale, the moneyed capitalist interest versus the globalist progressives. You know, there is this clash going all over the world. Maybe not so much in Canada. They're kind of on the same team up there.
Oh, no. Big time in Canada.
Oh, really?
Big time.
Okay, good. So that's all I have for the Raskin update. Of course, the Fed did raise rates last week. Everyone should know that, unless you're living under a rock. For the listeners, it is the Fed target range was 0% to 0.25%. They raised it 0.25 percentage point up to 0.25 to 0.5%. So on a long-term, you know, grand scheme of things, it's just a little blip at the end of the curve. It's not really that big a deal, but they continue to ramp up their aggressive hawkishness. So they talk about they want to raise rates 7 times possibly this year at every single Fed meeting. They also, Powell dropped or implied that they might be quantitative tightening in May, as early as May. So they are really pumping up the aggressive hawkish rhetoric from the Fed. And I want to point out, all the listeners and fans of this show will know that we think that the Fed's main policy tool is the rhetoric. It is the narrative. You know, this rate hike, the reason why it wasn't such a big deal is because it was already 6 months worth of buildup to it, and the market priced it in, and then the Fed moved. You know, the Fed is a follower. They don't, they explicitly say they're data driven, right? So the market moves and then the Fed reacts. And they try to move the market by jawboning it. That's the whole idea behind the Fed policy. But I'll stop there, and you guys can jump in with any comments or questions.
So, I mean, Ben, I'm sure you have some opinions here, but something that I think you probably know very well is how messed up global supply chains are right now. And that's a big reason why prices are going up. Probably not the only reason, but a big one. And I don't see how increasing interest rates helps with that. You know, if that's supposed to be a tool to curb inflation, seems to be like a misalignment there. I'm kind of curious what your thoughts are on, you know, everything that Ansel just kind of talked about.
Well, on the supply chain issue, you know, it's interesting to be in a truck a few days a week and learning about macro more than I ever thought I would know. And I also have a brother who's very senior on Bay Street, our equivalent to Wall Street. So because of that, I've always had some exposure to markets, how it works, and all that sort of stuff. I'm by no means an expert, but it's interesting to see now what's happening with the supply chain on the ground from inside a truck, and then kind of read what's going on in the economic headlines. And like anything else, it's as anybody who learns about economics, it's all trade-offs, right? No matter what you do, there's going to be a trade-off, an input or an output from the other side. In terms of interest rates going up, I mean, they probably should have gone up when the economy was good, if you believe in that narrative that the economy was good. I personally don't think it's been good for the past 30 years. I think it's been a steady decline, especially when you compare it against gold, right? But as people get more and more into Bitcoin, I'm going to pivot to that for a second, and there's a reason. You go down this rabbit hole, and that rabbit hole is what leads to you to understand monetary policy more than most people who have been in government for the last 100 years. Like, that's how smart the average person who's engaging in this is becoming, and it starts with Bitcoin. So then, as you get more and more and put more of your assets into Bitcoin, you start looking at the Fed rates and the 12 guys who've really got it sorted out. They know exactly what switches to push because they can anticipate price signals and market forces and whatever. And you start to learn that that's the fundamental problem with the whole system, is we have a socialized financial system. So yeah, they can increase rates. There's going to be a trade-off in one direction versus another. But as you go down this decentralized path, maybe there's something wrong with me. I tend to care less. I really do, because I see where things are going to be in the future. Whether the world's going to go on to a Bitcoin standard by force, or meaning people are just going to voluntarily throw more of their net worth into Bitcoin as a hedge, or governments and banks would wisely, in their interest, start to adopt this new asset as part of their portfolio. It's going to happen some way or another. I hope it just doesn't get violent. That's my only concern. And that does tend to happen if you look through history. But in terms of the interest rates going up, well, I don't know if I would do it in a time when we are really on the verge of an economic depression, as we can see through the supply chain. While so many people are either out of work or businesses can't hire people because they're getting money directly from the government. Businesses competing with the government for labor. It's ridiculous. It makes no sense. I saw a little bit of this on the news when I used to live in Colombia, because that was what was going on in Venezuela at the same time. And also with the Fed, I'm a little bit more sympathetic. I think the people who are there, like Jerome Powell's not, he's not an economist, he's a lawyer, right? I think he's the first Fed chair, if I'm not mistaken, who's not an economist. I don't know that, like, he's in a very difficult position. Would you want his job? I wouldn't want him for all the money in the world, right? And then there's that other element that George Gammon, this is a prop to him, that he's explained repeatedly, and I've tried to explain to other people, that they'll print treasury, but it's up to the commercial banking sector to lend it out. And if they don't lend it out, then you're not going to get the insane rates of inflation. But because everybody is so deep in debt right now, like our society is so overburdened with debt, they can't lend out all this money that they need. So I think there's it's a complicated question to answer, to say, is that the right decision to make? I say, I don't know, ask the Fed, they know everything. But, I'm sorry that, and I don't mean to cop out. It's so complicated, and I'm just a trucker, right?
Well, you're a Bitcoiner and a trucker, which makes you a pretty smart dude in my book.
Thanks,
But
brother.
yeah, I think we're right in line. Like, I give the Fed the benefit of the doubt, and we do on this show for sure, where we don't think they're like some evil corporation that's out to screw everybody. So, I mean, there are, of course, bankers like that, and there is that kind of perverse incentive out there for bankers to kind of be that way. But I don't think that all of them are by any means. And I think Jerome Powell is a fairly straight shooter. Anyway, I wanted to transition this over to sanctions, against Russia, but I didn't want to talk about this in terms of war or in terms of Europe or anything. I wanted to pull on this thread of Wall Street versus the progressive globalists and show how this can be seen, and also in this interaction here. So I don't have a specific link, but I remember reading right after the SWIFT ban came down, and the articles were saying that the Fed was not consulted. The Fed was not consulted for this SWIFT ban. It kind of took Jerome Powell by surprise. The reason behind that, I think the reason why the administration and, Biden didn't consult with Powell is because he knew Powell would try to veto that. And Powell didn't want these sanctions. I mean, Powell is interested in, the Fed is interested in financial stability. And if there are banks that are exposed to Russian debt that could impair, like, say, European banks or Asian banks that are exposed to Russian debt that goes down now because of these sanctions. And then how are those European banks, how are they going to be treated in the market, their debt and their repo transactions and all of that? So it's a contagion issue for Powell, and he wasn't consulted. So I do think that the Fed is kind of pissed. And, who owns the Fed? Well, it's the Wall Street banks. So that's another thing here between the progressives, which I believe Biden is a globalist. In America, you could say Clinton, Bush, Obama, and Biden. Those are the kind of globalist forces, and they've been, presidents for the longest time. But anyway, so taking this a step further, now we also have this Hunter laptop, and I don't know how much the Bitcoin Magazine wants me to talk about this. I'll just say that the 2 years ago, we knew it was a true story, right? And we knew that it was
we saw the pictures. We saw the pictures.
Yeah, the alternative media, the side of the internet that wants to think for themselves, they knew this was true. But of course, it was swept under the rug, and we were all called conspiracy theorists and everything. But why now? Why is it being exposed right now? And I think it's because Wall Street is not too happy with these sanctions, and they are pushing back against the elitists, which Biden is the big one there. So I think that this Hunter laptop thing is just another example of how Wall Street and the progressive globalists are at odds with each other. This did start back with just about, I would say, 6 months ago or so. They started shorting the big pharma stocks. And I think the banks started getting kind of hesitant about where they were going. Where was the mainstream media going? Where were these globalists, the EU and Biden administration, where were they going with all of this? And they started shorting pharma stocks. And now it looks like there are some big internal fights over the sanctions. I don't see this as a Russia versus Ukraine, or even a Russia being the big bad on the block. I see this as Putin being a populist, and the EU and these globalists don't like populism. They don't want these populists. So they will try to stop Trump. They'll try to stop Putin. They'll try to stop anybody that gets in their way that's a populist. So this is the clash is Wall Street and capitalists versus, the progressive authoritarians. That's how I see this clash building up. And I think the Fed actually, in a very weird way, the Fed is on our side on this. The Fed, comparing this or applying this to Bitcoin, we have the government side. They have a certain existential belief about the dollar and about the dollar status in the world. The capitalists really don't. The capitalists will use whatever they need to use. They'll use the best money. And that's one reason why we see the big banks getting more and more friendly to Bitcoin. JP Morgan, we just saw Goldman made their first over-the-counter Bitcoin transaction. I see that the moneyed capitalists are indifferent. they're not indifferent. They're neutral. They will use whatever they have to. And so that's again another competition there between government and capitalists. And lastly, I'll just say that, so this tells me that the Fed is leaving the door open to Bitcoin as reserves, which I think is a huge next step. I think we're much closer to central banks adopting Bitcoin than we want to believe. And, that could happen over the next year or two. Thoughts on that, Benjamin or CK?
You go first, CK.
Oh man, so
It's your
much,
show, brother.
so much to unpack.
I can go first if you want.
In terms of like the bankers versus like, let's just call it the New World Order or the Great Reset or whatever. I think it's a really interesting narrative, and just based out of purely trusting your signal, I have to give it a decent amount of credence. Although it's hard to it's hard for me to have enough information to kind of 100% validate it. It is really interesting to see the stock market starting to behave the way it does. For a long time, the narrative has been like, hey, all assets are going to go up because dollars are being printed. And we've been calling that more of a narrative than anything else for a while too. So I do think that things are very much shaking up, and it remains to be seen if Powell / the Fed is on anyone's side other than covering their ass and getting to the next day and getting reelected. But with that being said, I definitely can see why, maybe the Fed would be upset if they want stability to now take on all of this instability. Obviously, people are very upset at Biden, who is trying to blame Russia for the instability and also frame it as if, hey, the West needs to take on pain for freedom. And it looks like, the West isn't willing to take pain. At least a lot of the populace, they just want to ignore this and keep living life unburdened. So they can't do that forever. These things are going to come to a head. And we'll see if the theories are right and if your labeling of these different kind of cohorts is accurate. But you got to call a spade when you see it, and you can't really identify something until you call it out and label it. So if these are the factions, then it is really interesting to kind of see these forces playing out. Back over to you, Ben.
The few years I was very much involved in politics, I got involved. I hate politics, to be entirely honest, but I just wanted to do something. Everybody always complains and nobody gets involved. So that's why I decided, you know what, I'm going to get involved and help see if I can help usher in change, sort of thing. One thing I've learned, apologize for the dog. One thing I've learned is everybody's out for themselves. That's the problem with most of, when you hear grandiose conspiracy theories that it's one entity working together and subverting. It's like, no. Everybody's out for themselves and trying to stab each other in the back. That's what I see. In my own party, it was like that, let alone other parties. So that's one thing. The second thing is shut up. Sorry. When you look at all of these, when we talk about these organizations that are trying to use a strategy in politics called political entryism, that's the strategy that they use. When you hear about the Great Reset, WF, whatever, the one common denominator that I've seen that make conspiracy theories, but I would call them group strategies, function is money. That's the only time it ever works. And from everything that I've seen, I think what we've been witnessing is a bunch of global corporations trying to build themselves into upward monopolies, that they want to have 100 companies around the world that will control everything. And I've seen it in Latin America. Of all the years I've been going to Colombia, when I first started going there 20 years ago, you wouldn't see any American businesses. But now you're starting to see more and more American business. So I think that's why all these corporations got on side with these strategies of not globalization, because that's a trend of humanity, but the globalist initiative, if you will. And I think they're now realizing, and the Fed's, let's say, unease with the sanctions and the way things are going right now is an indicator of what I've seen in politics all these years, that yeah, maybe we're not so on board with all this stuff. Maybe all these promises you guys have made, maybe this is just not going to work out. And the sanctions against Russia, that's one problem. And I mean, I imagine, because I remember reading about that Powell, you know, he seems very measured, but for somebody as measured as him, might have lost his mind and said, okay, what are you doing now? Like, it's stupidity every other day, but this is a new level of stupidity. But I think also what's worse, you know, when we talk about these upward monopolies, when Google and Apple said they're suspending their payment system in Russia, as well as MasterCard and Visa, I thought, can't we just have one business that's not politicized? Just one thing. I don't need to see flags of different countries and overlays. Just take my money and shut up and give me the service that I want. And I think that was a major undertone within the convoy. They got sick and tired of having all the virtue signaling from suppliers and corporations and companies and insurance companies and all that sort of stuff, because at what point does it end? Is it going to come to a point that if I don't support Ukraine, and I'm not saying I support either, I think both sides suck, but if I don't support one side or the other, then all of a sudden I'm hateful and I should have my bank account frozen? Because I think that's what they've done with this recent move. People think it was an overstretch and it was a mistake they didn't anticipate, and that's probably true. But I think in the aftermath, what they're going to do, like these parties always do, is they think, well, we just uncovered another tool in the arsenal that we can use. And I think they've only started. This is only the first time, and we're going to see more and more people get debanked. Because think about it in terms of a broader strategy. You have a couple of organizations, the IMF, WF, whatever, who have a lot of the world's money, or in the case of the IMF, what's it called, SDRs, their version of monopoly money, that they are trying to spread around the world. You know, we saw they tried to do that with Lukashenko in Belarus, right? And if they now have this tool of debanking people, and they want better enforcement, you know, because people are racist, people are dangerous, people are extremists, or whatever. And if this starts getting out of hand, much like, I don't know, a Twitter censorship bot, then you know what the solution is going to be? Well, we're going to have a social credit system. That way we can verify if somebody's truly hateful or bigoted or dangerous and all that sort of stuff. So I think a lot of these things intertwine, but there's no, like, aside from a couple of very opportunistic organizations, NGOs, which should be heavily investigated, and perhaps we need a convoy to Davos, wink, wink. Aside from that, it's everybody out for themselves. They're all politicians, they're all stabbing, like even in policing, the higher levels are politicians. In banking, many of them are politicians, especially through this strategy of political entryism, that everybody's trying to take control of the pie. They're trying to figure out how they can do it. And you have this one centralized organization distributing money to everybody just to get them on board, right? And they distribute money via, you know, campaign contributions, and that's where they get their influence. And I'll give you one example. We have an MP who I used to be friends with. I thought she was solid, and she was a conservative MP from downtown Calgary, and she went to Davos one year, and she was put on the global leaders of the World Economic Forum. And shortly after, she went on to Twitter and started apologizing for being a cisgendered white female. And I'm like, okay, that's where the strategy is coming from. That's the subversion of the Western system for whatever their ambitions or purposes are. I think we're starting to see a little bit of it. And there's a great book on Amazon you can read by Klaus Schwab called COVID-19 and the Great Reset, the opportunity that COVID-19 has brought. So it's almost like, I remember thinking, shouldn't you be hiding this? Like, I thought this is going to be quiet and subversive. So this is not to say there's a grand conspiracy. There's a political strategy that's used by people who have certain global initiatives. And I think it's around this whole holy grail of these upward monopolies. I might be wrong, just my suspicion.
I really like that color, Ben. I think I would be remiss if I didn't talk to you about kind of the fears around food shortages in the West, especially around the sanctions to Russia kind of affecting fertilizer and other raw materials that are used in kind of like the food supply chains. Based on kind of your knowledge as a trucker and maybe how much you're paying attention to things falling out, do you have any comments around kind of like food in North America, food globally, and potential disruptions there? And then I do think we have a hard stop, so we can wrap after that.
Yes. In my end of trucking, I don't really deal with food distribution. We do frozen foods and stuff like that, like the packaged food. It's much like when the Fed makes a change. It takes a while for the supply chain to expose some of the shortcomings. So there's an excellent video I saw recently on the fertilizer problem as it related to China, and I can't remember it, but it was amazing. If I find the link, I'll send it to you guys. I don't know. I really don't know. The only thing though, the bright side, I posted yesterday, and sorry if this is lazy and sloppy, but there's a special on Amazon called Clarkson's Farm with Jeremy Clarkson. And why is that important? Because we need regular people to understand the agriculture sector. And this thing, although it's an entertaining TV show, apparently has done an amazing job at sparking interest in the farming and agriculture sector. And the other thing that may happen is worse. I'm seeing everybody I know who's in cities for the past year have been leaving cities and moving to rural towns. I know 2 people who've bought farms and they're learning how to farm. So much like we've had a shortage of truckers in Canada that's now at 33,000, we now have a generation of little kids that were standing by the side of the highway holding Canadian flags saying, "Thank you, truckers, and I want to become a trucker when I grow up." That may help solve the supply chain issue. I think the authoritarian, just egregious restrictions that's occurred in urban areas has spawned enough interest from regular people, coupled to programs like what I just told you, that there's a newfound respect and interest in the agriculture and farming sector. Maybe that will solve the problem over time. And also look how different the world is today than it was 100 years ago. Like all of us can go live, 4 hours north of the city of Toronto or rural New York, or 2 hours north of Medellin or whatever, where there's essentially nothing but farms. But as long as I have an internet connection, I'm basically plugged into the city. So I don't need to be there anymore. So yeah, there's a lot of concerns about the supply chain and what's going to happen to the food sector. I'm actually not all that worried because all these little pieces are coming into play as our society have changed. And we all know, my friends say, the gringos, that we all need to lose a little bit of weight, right? So we can reduce our calorie intake to below 10,000 calories a day, like some of us do, Did that answer your question?
Well, CK just jumped off here for a second, but I had a comment on that. I totally agree with you, and I hope to get more people on in the future. Maybe we'll have to have you back about localism, like a return to localism of some sort, because that is going to be a real big shift in how the economy is structured for sure. But I do want to point out that that is only possible in a peaceful place. So if
Yeah.
you are in a war-torn area or a place where your neighbors are threatening you, you want to be in a more defensible type of position.
Mhm.
And so that only certain places in the world is, dramatic decentralization possible. So
That's right. Also, just to add to that, your comments on localism, something that people don't realize, that I didn't realize until I got involved in politics. Political entryism as a tool started at the local level. It didn't start at the federal level in politics. People got involved a couple of decades before. And we're talking about people who are aligned with, let's say, the Communist Party in China. There's other adversarial governments around the world, whether it's Russia or other governments. I'm not commenting on who it was, but as a strategy, they started at the local level a couple of decades ago in Canada's case, and I think in the US a little bit before then. And it would first be school trustees. They would get people into city councils, and then eventually run for, they would get appointed to offices within the certain ministries, or they would run for provincial politics. And now we're at the level where the degree of political entryism in Canada on the federal level is absolutely insane. And that's why you're seeing so much influence from these foreign NGOs that are essentially dictating our policy now. The policy is not dictated by us, it's dictated by the lobby firms and the entryists that are working together within politics.
All right, Ben, thank you so much for joining the show. A lot of diverse knowledge beyond just what happened in Canada. So really excited to have you at the Bitcoin conference and excited to have you back on the show in the future. Until
Cool.
then, where can people follow what you're doing? I'm sure many people are really excited about the announcement that you teased that should be coming up within the next few weeks here. But yeah, where can people learn more?
Follow me on Twitter, Getter, BJ Dictor, so BJDICHTER. We'll be rolling things out slowly over time on the Substack. So it's bjdictor.substack.com. We'll have our next, parallel blog coming up sometime soon. And don't hesitate to reach out, send me a message over Twitter. I get thousands of messages, but I slowly am getting through everything. And I will be at Bitcoin. I'll be there every single day on my crutches. I can't run away from anybody. So if you want to ask me a question, unfortunately, I'm going to be trapped. I'm not going to be able to escape. So you'll have me at your whims.
All right. We'll be in Miami again. Really excited for it. Nolan will be in Miami and he is up next. So until then, y'all, this was Fedwatch. Peace.
Thanks, guys.
We're live.
What is up, guys? You know what time it is. It's that time where we break up with everything we don't want, we don't need. And I'm going to ask the question we know the answer to. Nolan, how you doing today? You're muted. No.
We can do it again. I
Nolan.
love life, and I'm enthusiastic about the future of humanity. Thanks, Satoshi. Thank God. Thank whoever you need to thank. Things are looking great. Speaking of God, speaking of who you're going to thank, we know in the Bible there is this idea of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. So today, in order to underline that we're an inflection point, a change point, I'm going to talk about the 4 horsemen of hyper-Bitcoinization, because they showed their head today. So they've reared their head. And the feedback loop that will feed hyper-Bitcoinization is actually pretty apparent today. And we're going to talk about it. We're going to compare and contrast all that's going on in the world that goes into making dollars with the world that goes into making Bitcoin, and see if the era of hyper Bitcoinization is just over the corner. I think it is. I was actually inspired by this whole piece today by Kamala Harris. She really did a poetic and gorgeous and beautiful. You have to see it because it will touch you inside your heart, because she was able to really capture the beauty of what she called the passage of time. And it will go down as one of the greatest, I think anyway, poems. It's poetic. It's poetic. She talked about the passage of time. And it made me think about one of the big crises we have going on right now. And this 4 horsemen of the hyper Bitcoinization change are really based on these crises coming all at once. The first here is political. With that speech, it sort of reminded us a little bit, I was at Satoshi Roundtable before, so when she spoke about the passage of time, it reminded me in 2020 of Satoshi Roundtable when William Shatner, Captain Kirk, was there. And Captain Kirk said, I've had all these writers that worked on scripts, and I was always asking them, I was always curious. I would say, I get space, I get it. And time, I get it. But this word that I have to read all the time, space, time, I don't get it. Help me, help me. And then he said, I think the same of Bitcoin. So all of you people here who know about Bitcoin, teach me. I need to know. So I gave him a lesson, not unlike this one today, not unlike what we're about to get today, because I got to meet him after that and talk to him. He grew up not far from where I grew up. So he's actually a Montrealer, believe it or not. And there's an amazing myth at the university in Montreal called McGill. And there's a place where there's the student union and bars, you can party there. And it's called the William Shatner Building. And I told him and I asked him to confirm the rumor. It was an urban myth in Montreal when I was growing up. It was named after him. Apparently the university, if you remember Dick Pound, he was a guest on this show. He was the fellow who knew all about the tennis player in China being in great shape. He said, no, nothing to see there. So this fellow, Dick Pound, is actually the chancellor of McGill University. And one of the other side jobs these cantillionaires get, I'm just going to be running all the drugs in the Olympics, and then I'm going to be a chancellor of a university. And these guys are amazing, the kind of output they get. It's incredible. Dick Pound. And so Dick basically in the end said, we're going to name the building after you, Captain Kirk, so give us some money. And William Shatner was like, thanks, bros, peace out, I'm not giving you anything, forget it. So he's got this whole building named after him. He didn't give $1, right? So speaking of the passage of time, he got it all this time for free. Good for him. So political crises that we're going through, we hear speeches like what we heard with Kamala Harris. She became the vice president because it ticked the box. I think everyone can recognize that now. And we're missing out, I think, on, Biden is a little creaky looking, I'd say, but do you really feel confident that the whole system is set up so that the backup plan, like the backup goalie in hockey, is going to win the game? What's going to happen here if he's in trouble? Like, what if the AI machine that creates his facial rendering breaks down one day? What are we going to do? I don't know. It doesn't inspire much confidence. Speaking of Biden, though, he did also mention that times have shifted, right? He said there's a new world order and America needs to lead it, right? What does that mean? Well, it probably just means what it means. I think a lot of people use that word, like we've heard the Great Reset said a few times by Trudeau and a few other world leaders. I think they're really just unoriginal. That's where I see it. I can agree there's so much we can't see that belongs to the occult or even some form of mysticism. There's a lot that doesn't meet the eye, but Joe Biden being in charge of running, hinting at, playing some form of, leading the audience or persuasion that New World Order is coming doesn't really do it for me. But it does mention what we saw with the currency. And that is that the Federal Reserve is going to have a rate hike. They said yesterday they're going to do it. And it's got all kinds of people talking. So you got Joe Weisenthal, who we follow closely in the Bitcoin space, because he's one of the original journalists to actually pay attention to Bitcoin and everything that was going on in the Bitcoin space. But at a certain point, if you get it wrong so many times, you have to resort to something that I call mind reading. And Joe's entire note today on the interest rate hike is just mind reading. So Joe comes out and says, for a long time, there was a perception the Fed would fight stock market sell-offs. So the idea that if the stock market was going down, the Federal Reserve would intervene and make sure that America didn't suffer a recession due to a stock market sell-off. And that was basically the operating plan that the operating assumption that a lot of people had all this time. So his whole newsletter today is, I wrote about the opposite. Maybe the Fed and Powell is uncomfortable with stock market rallies. So these guys have now come to just mind reading. It's a comic book. It's a comic book. What if Jerome Powell decides to do a thing that he wouldn't normally do? And Sven Henrik, who luckily has seen the light when it comes to Bitcoin, a very big macro guy, a commodity trader, a very big look on bonds, I guess. I don't know everything about him. I know that he trolled Bitcoin for many years and had a huge account because of that, a little bit like the other fellow with the gold. What's his name again? The Schiff or whatever, with the gold, buy gold and all that stuff. And so this Henrik guy was a bit the same. Then he turned into a Bitcoiner, but he reminds everyone that, okay, the Fed has raised rates this time, but in 2018, when they hit 2.5%, this whole thing that Joe Weisenthal was going on, they're not going to be able to handle a stock market crash, but maybe they are now. Maybe they are now. Well, Sven is saying no, because it's one thing at 1%. Yeah, all right, we can all play a game. Okay, I have kids. I know what it's like to go half speed. You're doing great. You're doing great. No problem. You're doing great. But when it comes down to it, the times have shifted. They can't raise interest rates to 2.5%. Sven reminds us they've printed trillions of dollars more. They would have to get to 3, 4, 5% to even get back to the place where they could affect the market to the extent that they did at 2.5% interest rates, and they're not getting there. That's his prediction, and mine too. So you can read Joe Weisenthal's latest romance novel, or you can just not pay attention to the Federal Reserve. These people are out of their minds. Don't bother. It's a waste of your time, right? We talk a lot about breaking up with things. One thing you can break up with is Fed updates. What are they gonna do, right? Cut that out of your life. You don't need it. The next piece here is, so we have a crisis, a political crisis. We have a crisis in currency because we have the inflation now, the measurable inflation, and no way to really rein it in from a policy perspective. There's other ways, but from a pure interest rate policy perspective, it ain't happening, right? It ain't happening. The next one is economic. And this one I have New York Times ? Because Nicole Hannah-Jones, who got I don't know, she won like a Pulitzer or something. She did that 1619 project the New York Times pumped as American history. And it turns out she has a problem with tipping, by the way. So she said tipping comes from slavery, right? It comes from slavery. And she said that yesterday on Twitter. She says, tipping is a legacy of slavery and it's not optional. Then it shouldn't be a tip, but simply included in the bill. Have you ever stopped to think why we tip? Like why tipping is a practice in the US and almost nowhere else? And she goes on to explain that it's a tipping of a legacy of slavery. Well, of course, everyone jumps in. It's not only American, all kinds of countries tip. It's not had nothing to do with just America. Yeah, Americans are the most generous, I guess. They tip a lot. But they also mention in the replies that Shakespeare wrote about tipping in a bunch of his plays, right? In like Twelfth Night, they call it a gratility. So I guess it was the word before gratuity. So this goes way, way back. So as if the New York Times didn't even have, sort of zero credibility for associating with people like this. Just yesterday, they have now resorted to changing articles that were written years ago in case they get looked at again. And I'll give you the example. And by changing, I don't even mean change the words or anything. I mean, change the packaging. So there's all this stuff about, are you a Putin apologist or do you hate Ukraine? If anyone has an opinion now on Russia and Ukraine that isn't the actual orthodoxy that everyone has to repeat, then you're a Russian sympathizer and all these other things. So that's sort of in the current. I'm not saying if it's true or not, I'm just saying what people are starting to observe and comment on. And it turns out that a lot of people, because they were getting involved in this debate about how much is appropriate criticism for the Ukrainian guy in the green screen and walking in front of a green screen and banning of political parties over there and in Ukraine and all this stuff. And so the New York Times had an article from 2018 where it said in Ukraine, the title was, in Ukraine, corruption is now undermining the military. And it was a whole series of stories about how corruption in their government and their military was a huge, huge problem. Now, within the debate, within the context of the current debate between Russia, Ukraine, and the potential misgivings, problems, misbehaviors of the Ukrainian side, people started citing this New York Times article because it's sort of against what some of the more recent New York Times articles have been regarding Ukraine and the Russia conflict, good and bad. And so in the end, this New York Times article was getting shared so much as defense of the argument that Ukraine is maybe not good, that they started labeling the years in which the article was printed. So it was being used currently. It went viral the past couple of days, but it was an article from 2018. In 2 instances now, on the actual picture, they changed and highlighted a 2018. They changed the metadata on the story so that when it was shared, it would come out displaying 2018. It would come up in search engines in 2018 more obviously. And then again in the actual title. Now, is this all wrong? I don't think so. I think if information has changed from 2018, something goes viral again, maybe out of context, we don't know. But when it comes to the New York Times, we can't tell anymore, right? They published a letter. It used to be 50 national security advisors that said the Hunter Biden laptop was disinformation, but now we know that the letter was actually just 50 liars. So they did us a favor by signing this letter all those months ago, because now we have a list. When we say drain the swamp and all that stuff, Trump used to go on, well, then we have a list. We know who they are. We know who the actual people who will lie in public are. We have a list of 50 names of people willing to lie in public. And we know a lot more about them now. So that's good news, right? But we can't really trust the New York Times to tell the difference between that stuff. So we can't even tell the difference. We can't even trust them to be clear, let's say, or to not influence when things were written in order to affect current debates today. So kind of a weird situation. The final one that I have here is this financial crisis. So the 4 horsemen of the hyper Bitcoinization change are the political crisis, the currency crisis, the economic crisis. By economic crisis here, what I mean is the economic incentives behind a news organization are lost. The very running of a business in this world that is about eyeballs and attention and news is so conflicted and not necessarily interested in giving you the right amount of information. It's interested in the right amount of viewers, the right amount of audience, and the right amount of buzz. But the other part, the right amount of information to the reader, like you would anticipate from newspapers maybe a long time ago, but maybe it was wrong then too, right? Maybe that's not what was ever going on. So here we are. Now this final one, financial crisis, this one's really interesting because everyone's talking about it today. And it's this Luna thing with a blockchain called Terra. So this blockchain called Terra with its native coin Luna is about to buy $10 billion worth of Bitcoin. Now, I must put a disclosure. I do not hold Luna. I do not deal with the stable coin, although I've seen it before. I helped them launch in 2018 from an event point of view. When Do Kwon, the guy running this thing, was launching it, I was running a crypto event for CoinDesk in Singapore in September 2018. And I knew some of the backers from Korea because, as I mentioned on the show before, I have a lot of Korean connections and I think about Korea all the time. And I helped set up CoinDesk Korea there and a few other things. I live there. I can speak the language a little, blah, blah, blah. I'm into Korea. So I helped them launch just from a publicity point of view, good stage, good place to be, good place to get some attention. Singapore brought it down, but was very curious about what they were doing with the Korean won stablecoin, because we know there's US dollar stablecoins, but at the time they were the first to come up with not a US dollar and a stablecoin. And because of my time in Korea trading Forex, basically, because I was earning Korean, I got used to the ropes of all that stuff and thought it was really interesting. And what I end up seeing when I look at this is, so the disclosure, and this is also not financial advice, so you'll never get financial advice in this show. This show is a relationship show, so never take advice, financial advice from me. I don't know what I'm doing when it comes to that stuff, right? So don't hold the coins. This is a relationship show, but I want to talk about one thing that's happening around it. which is we're basically seeing from this instance. So I put in this piece of gasoline here, in this gas tank, I put Korean won. As we mentioned on the show before, Korea has been manipulating its currency for quite a while and isn't necessarily that interested in the US dollar or the Korean won, or not interested in the Korean won in the same way that a patriotic American might be with the US dollar. They're kind of okay with experimenting, changing things up. They have a culture. They don't need this money thing to identify with Korean culture. Korean culture is a lot bigger and more important and impressive and rich than just money on a bill. And it's already in its own way at, you know, inflated numbers, because I know just your basic hamburger and fries are $10. Over there is like 10,000 won, right? So they've already got too many zeros there, and this inflation happened years ago. But here's what's really interesting, is that it basically is a long-term bet and speculative attack on both the Korean won and the US dollar. This is more or less the George Soros move all over again. But there's one caveat. It is being done in a way that we would recognize from private banking era. So in the private banking era, you needed actual reserves. You didn't have a reserve backer like the Federal Reserve. You needed actual saving. You needed money in a box somewhere to have confidence. So in the same way that I've always, for Bitcoin, promoted the concept of proof of reserves, because it instills confidence in the institution you're dealing with, because they have it there, you know they have it there, you know they're not lending it out to different risk pools, you know they're not throwing it in with all the degenerate margin traders and all these other guys. They're using it in a way that is responsible and holding it in a secure way, and in general, you'll be able to audit it yourself. So these tools I've always thought of as a really important beacon of confidence for banking as we go forward in a world where the Reserve Bank doesn't really fulfill the job of confidence any longer and make the world go round and perpetuate things. So in this world, if you can start something that actually just makes a bet that, like I said, interest rates are never going up. The way to think about it is if this Luna Terra blockchain with its reserves ever undergoes this crisis of confidence, they have the Bitcoin in reserve. It's like knowing you have a really special card in a card game, like a trump card, like you can put it down when you need it in order to get through a certain difficult time. And from a psychological point of view, because that's what this show is really about, it's about the psychology engine of pushing this stuff forward. The Terra stablecoin in Korea already has widespread adoption because the economic agents like Kakao, which is kind of like the Korean Google, these guys already got the free Korean money from their central bank. And these guys were already taking that, these successful companies were already taking their quantitative easing printed money in Korea. Now what they're doing is gathering it all together and literally pouring it into Bitcoin. And the way I see it, when you start that engine up and you start this speculative attack it's almost like a banking point of view. You can think of Terra and Luna in a way as a proto crypto bank in the same way that you might with that Ethereum project MakerDAO. Except it's not all kinds of companies and registrations and who's behind this and we don't know and I don't know what's going on there. It's not anything like that. I don't know much more about it. I have received payment from them in order to help them frame events and context and global sort of stuff we talk about on this show, but nothing more than that. So not a holder, not promoting the project, merely stating that it is a horseman of the apocalypse, because we more or less got a quasi crypto bank from Korea that just started up with a Bitcoin reserve in order to fund operations and instill confidence in in what it plans on doing in the future. So in a lot of ways, it is a real financial attack on the dollar, on what Biden would call the old world order, because he thinks there's a new one that he really wants to be in on. So maybe he's out there trying to get some Luna or something like that. That would be good for him. Not for you, not for me. We don't know anything about that stuff. We're here to just talk about it happened. And it adds to this, what I call like a kind of feedback loop here, right? I've got sort of the infinity loop going on here, but what I see happening is with these 4 crises happening at once, and this, what Luna is doing is going to spread around. These are wealthy Koreans who don't, it looks like, feel safe with their Korean won, and sure as shit don't feel safe with the US dollar, have created something that will more or less give them purchasing power, but save their reserves, so that this, what amounts to banking entity, I think that's what it is. I'm putting words in their mouth, but this is how I interpret it, is going to be able to sort of perpetuate and add to this. Like, picture many more of these happening. This red gas tank and yellow nozzle that creates this beautiful orange liquid here that's flowing and greasing up this infinity loop, might just happen sooner than we think. These 4 crises right now are the reason why we want to break up with the dollar world and embrace something new. And so that's the episode for today. That's all I got.
Thanks so much, Nolan. It's been a pleasure having you. We're kind of on a tight schedule here because we got another guest coming on right after you. So we will cut to a quick commercial break. We'll bring them on. It's always good to talk to you and look forward to seeing you tomorrow.
What is up, guys, and welcome back. We are joined by our own Pleb Music, who not only has dropped a new video, but for those of you who don't realize, like, he makes all the magic happens behind the scenes as far as all the sounds you hear, all the podcasts you listen to. Pleb, how you doing, buddy?
Thank you. Nice being here.
Else.
Yeah, just call me Pleb Music. That's fine.
Okay,
I
cool.
mean, I just doxed my face totally. So yeah, gonna run with this one. But yeah, good to be here. It's kind of cool to be backstage and see how everything functions, and not being on the receiving side, because I'm obviously watching all of the streams and editing them afterwards. So yeah, good to be part of it.
Nice. Well, before we show what we're about to watch, do you want to give us a little bit of what's the log line here? What should we expect going into this little video you've created for all of us?
Yeah, sure. So people who don't know me, I'm like a content producer, Bitcoin content producer, and I recently left my home country due to reasons, and yeah, I am now on the verge of searching new Bitcoin citadels. So basically what my goal is to make videos about different Bitcoin citadels and show the plebs and yeah, all of the Bitcoiners out there what is happening in this world. So yeah, we can learn from each other, because there may be some mistakes made in one citadel where another citadel kind of can learn from it. And that's basically my journey. I started today. I have no idea where this is going. But yeah, this is kind of the first video I released, and yeah,
I think now's as good a time as any for us to press play and grab that popcorn.
Starting it up now.
If you are not orange pilled yet, you're gonna come here from Europe to Raab, and I want to see you here. This is fucking proof of work. I'm bullish on this island, guys. Very bullish.
Hey Hey guys, my name is Pleb Music and welcome to my series, The Citadel Hunter. I want to show you all of the different Bitcoin citadels which are being built worldwide. But what exactly is a Bitcoin citadel? The idea of a citadel has existed since the dawn of history. 3,000 years ago, the first citadels appeared as the strongest and safest part of a city. This citadel protected its inhabitants from malicious actors outside of the city. What were the benefits of living inside such a citadel? Basically, you had food supplies for everybody, you had self-sovereign energy resources, you were protected of the malicious actors outside, and you had your own educational system within the citadel. Basically everything you required during uncertain times. And guess what? Uncertainty is a growing issue in today's world.
Inflation in the United States soaring to its highest level in 4 decades.
The global supply chain isn't functioning as it normally does.
The Chinese authorities have put an entire city into lockdown after the discovery of just 3 asymptomatic COVID cases.
And this is the exact reason why Bitcoiners are building Bitcoin citadels, which are very similar to the ones we talked about before. The goal is basically to build a structured society that will protect Bitcoiners' values and foster all kind of Bitcoin-related businesses. Just imagine a city which runs 100% of Bitcoin. Every transaction you make, Bitcoin. Every business accepting Bitcoin. And every neighbor is a Bitcoiner. And that is basically a Bitcoin citadel. A place where people with shared values and common beliefs live together. And Raab in Croatia is the first European citadel which I have explored and I'm gonna show you today.
I left my home country. I just flew in here and I met a pleb. I was in contact via Twitter with him, who set me up with basically everything. And his name is Pavao. Pavao, that's the pleb I was talking about.
Hello.
He's gonna tell us a little bit about the island, what it really is about here in Raab, because this is actually a pretty old citadel. So it's not just a Bitcoin citadel, but it has a rich history of being a citadel. And he's the expert.
Not the expert, but yeah, I can at least talk a little bit about the Raab Citadel.
And to get the first overview of the Citadel, we went to a viewpoint in the old city.
So we are standing on the top of the old city, and what you are seeing here is a very protected, secluded island, and the whole island throughout its history, it was never broken down, destroyed, because citizens of Raab, they always managed to somehow make a deal with the current empire. This just shows you that the roots of this very civilized citadel go very deep. This citadel was built by a plan, right? So it's divided in 3 parts.
As you can see, the city is divided into different streets. The upper street, the middle street, and the lower street. And each of them has a unique backstory.
So this is like the upper street. This is very spiritual, used to be aristocrat street. The real estate is a store of value. Now we are in the middle street. Remember, 3 streets, upper, middle, and lower street. What you can see here is the street where all the merchants and producers used to be.
Consume is actually accepting Bitcoin. So it starts, you know. This is the beginning of the Raab hyper-Bitcoinization.
This street was mostly blue-collar workers, people who worked on the ships, tradesmen, and they would have their business performed here.
That's the Pleb Street. So this is gonna be where we start out for this cycle. We're gonna just, you know, we're gonna work ourselves up every cycle.
Yeah.
3 to 4 cycles in, all of this is gonna be full of Bitcoiners.
Yeah.
And but for now, you're gonna work and live in the Pleb Street. Sorry guys, we have to be honest, it's the beginning of the Bitcoin Citadel, right? This is the first Citadel I'm visiting, and obviously we have a lot of Bitcoiners already here, but there's still a lot to do.
the overall history and the background of this island and the mentality of people is very conducive for building the Bitcoin Citadel. People already understand the value of work. They have the traditional values. It's going to take some time, but I'm sure that like in 3 or 4 cycles, this is going to be amazing place to live. Like my main focus right now is really orange pilling people here on the island one by one. People need time to get what Bitcoin is. They need time to learn how to receive it, how to hold it securely. They need time to experience the number go up technology. That's the strategy, just slowly, one by one. I like to take it slow, but make sure that people understand what they're getting into.
This is basically the start of the orange pilling here on the island, right? There are a lot of people getting into it. You can pay with Lightning already in here. Yep. This is like the first step you can do as a European. If you're searching like-minded people, you can come here. So what do I mean by that? Even though most of the people don't understand Bitcoin yet, their thinking and mind is primed to understand it soon. Pavel is doing a tremendous job with orange pilling them. And you have a lot of Bitcoiners here. There will be more and more Bitcoiners that are coming to this week.
Let's see how it goes.
Let's see how it goes.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for watching this video. I really appreciate your time. Let's make sure I'm not wasting it in the future, right? Let me know what you're most interested about the Citadels. The Citadel food, the Citadel energy supply, or simply the taxes you're gonna pay in the jurisdictions. So comment down below what you want me to cover so I don't waste your time in the future. We're gonna make it, Plebs together strong, and I'm gonna see you in the next video. Bye bye.
What is up, fam? We are back in my blurred out mother's basement and Pleb music.
I also got a blurred out background, so we got that going, I guess.
Chris just wants to dox his bedroom. He wants everyone to see the closet that he has.
I do.
Yeah.
Max, that was an awesome documentary, though, getting into it. I think that was really well done. I'm excited to explore and see what other Citadels you go to next. Can you give us a drop of where that might be? You don't have to dox yourself, but
Yeah, for sure. So I'm not in this Citadel anymore, so I got all the content already prepared. I'm right now in the post-production of all of this, which means I'm in another Citadel, or at least in another country, another continent, and yeah, it's gonna be way more down south, let's put it this way. And yeah, but there's still gonna be a couple of Raab episodes dropping before I'm gonna start posting this one, because the episodes just take a lot of time to do the post-production, the color grading, and all of this. And yeah, but this is the first stop, Raab. Now I'm in another continent, and after this I still don't know. So yeah, if anybody has suggestions where Citadels are being built, I'm happy to talk about it.
You heard it here first, guys. If you know the Bitcoin Citadel, tell Max. He will be entry number 2 in your one-person Citadel, wherever you reside.
That's the way. Yes, sir.
Talk to us a little bit though about the inspiration behind this. Like, why did you want to tell this story? Why did you want to highlight and share stories from the Citadels? And what is your hope or goal throughout these experiences, both for yourself and with these movies?
Yeah, for me, I was in a state of like, or let's put it this way. I was in a place where I was like, okay, I want to leave my home country right now, and I want to change something in my life. But for me, it was always like, it was kind of hard to do this decision. I mean, I was traveling a lot, like in the last years, but it's something different to move to a country and like to move there, like seriously, you know, it's not a vacation, but you're moving there. And since I got orange pilled and kind of understand way more what's happening in the world, therefore there are also way more questions which need to be answered about the places you're thinking of moving to, right? For example, obviously all of the El Salvador hype happening and like the Bitcoin legal tender laws and stuff like this. But this all sounds great, but still I was missing kind of the insights which really showed me how is living there, what do I need to take into consideration when being there. And that's kind of my goal, to show the plebs, okay, if you want to go to a Citadel in Croatia, this might be an option. And my goal now is just to show, okay, this is the problem in the Citadel. Those are the benefits. And yeah, just showing one by one my experience and hoping, first of all, to inspire other plebs to either move to a Bitcoin friendly country or to a Bitcoin friendly place, because yeah, this truly changed my life, chilling more and more with Bitcoiners. And yeah, I hope I can inspire some other people to do the same, because it's easier than you think.
There was a question from the comments real quick, Max, if you don't mind answering. Someone was asking, what was the mode of transportation for getting there? Or what was the main mode of transportation there, I guess? I don't know if it's walking or what.
No, I think they're asking how you got there.
Yeah, like a lot of plebs were driving with the car. I was flying in there. And yeah, so it wasn't that, like, basically it was quite crazy. It was a decision of like 2 days. So I had another friend who was traveling with me there, another pleb, and we decided, okay, we're gonna leave the country this weekend, no matter what, and we're gonna leave to this Citadel. And then we just booked our flights, and yeah, there were no issues at all. Also, yeah, that's basically how we get. But a lot of other plebs, I mean, there's quite a pleb community already there, and a lot of them just drove there with their car, and yeah, also no issues. If this answers your question.
Yeah, Q,
cart,
anything?
I think.
Q, anything else to add?
Yeah. I want to talk about efficiency, because my God, you are bouncing around the world. Would it not have been easier to visit all of the Citadels in, well, Docs Europe, because that one was in Croatia? What is the rationale between just bouncing around like the way you are?
Basically, that's just how it happened. It's like I couldn't plan it. There were other opportunities and things that I had to do. And yeah, it's kind of, since everything was already booked where I'm going to next thing, and so I couldn't do it. Basically, that's it. I'm super flexible, so even though I'm now in another continent, I might go back to Europe at some point. But yeah, Europe is just not the point to be for me right now. And that's why I wanted to get out of Europe and go to another continent. Yeah.
We're not going to ask you where you are, but I want to ask you where you're going next.
I'm thinking of El Salvador, to be honest, just to experience it, to see what's happening there. And yeah, maybe going there for a couple of months, or like 1 or 2 months, just to check out, because for me it sounds amazing, El Salvador, but I still don't really know how it is in El Salvador. Maybe I'm missing something. I know there are some other guys. Anita Posch was there, I think, for a couple of weeks and was reporting about it. But yeah, I'm thinking of El Salvador, Latin America, that kind of area. I'm gonna be in Miami, so if you don't have your tickets yet, guys, you gotta get your tickets and use our promo code. It's YTMAG. You're gonna get 10% off, guys. But yeah.
Oh man, I literally was like, no, I don't want to end this second because I have one more question. All right. Every director always has to do this, and it's really annoying when they have to. But was there a scene or certain moments either that you had to cut out or that you didn't have your camera with you and you couldn't catch that you wish you did?
That's a good one, to be honest. Yeah, I had a lot, like, because my issue was I was just filming the last like the last months of me living there. So like I would love to have like this, okay, this is how you feel leaving your country, because like the first days and weeks were kind of hard, you know. It's kind of, okay, what the fuck am I doing here? Or I left all my family and my friends there, and this would be kind of cool to show how I managed to do it, because to be honest, it was everything was Bitcoin related that got me over this, you know, because I was like listening to all the podcasts and talking to other plebs, which made such a big difference for me that I knew, okay, it's the right decision to do it, and it's just a time that I need to overcome. And I think this would have been a pretty cool starting point for the series to talk about it. But unfortunately, I don't have the footage. I'm thinking of maybe just talking about it. I think it's still an important topic to talk about. But that would have been cool to capture this with a camera. And regarding the other part of the question, if I cut some stuff, yeah, I cut a lot of stuff. I'm still thinking how toxic I can be on there. But yeah, I have cut a lot of things out of there.
Well, guys, it's about that time. You know the drill. If you want to hang out with Chris, Max, or myself, or my bad, use code YTMAG, get 10% off of your conference tickets.
Yeah,
like I said,
I would love to meet all of. Yeah, that's maybe another thing I would want to add. If you didn't meet plebs yet, it's gonna change your life, and this is the opportunity of your lifetime to meet other plebs. And so yeah, if you can make it, I would definitely go there, because yeah, it's gonna change your life. It changed my life, and yeah, I would love to meet all of you, because I want to meet as many plebs as I can and talk with them, because I freaking love all the plebs. And yeah.
Guys, you heard it here. Thanks so much for joining us on another episode of Bitcoin Magazine Live. We're gonna cut for the day. We're gonna cut to the ads, and then yeah, it's been a pleasure being with you guys, and we will see you on tomorrow's episode. Have a good one. Peace.